Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to our regular city council meeting on Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. If everyone would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. Okay, we'd like to start off by recognizing the Catawba Indian Nation. Haley Brazil, is she present? Yes. It would be odd if you didn't walk up there, just to say. You know, skateboards don't really work well on carpet.
Well, Tanake Niya Haley Brazil, Ye Iswa Haren, Ye Iswa Isware, Ye Iswa Katabare, Hawu City Council, Hawu Tega K. So hello, my name is Haley Brazil. I'm a citizen of the Catawba Nation. I'm Catawba on my mother's side, Irish on my father's side. I have been working for Catawba for about 3 years. I'm currently their food sovereignty coordinator. Food sovereignty is my passion. It's what brought me back to my tribe. It's one of the reasons why I believe that I'm still here as a living individual. I ended up reaching out to TK because I saw that there was going to be deer processed. I get really excited when deer is tabled to the conversation. I currently work to teach a lot of the people at Catawba Nation how to deer hunt, and then also get them enrolled as licensed individuals and also help out with some financial assistance that we have. We did end up receiving 2 separate donations from TKK. The first amount was a donation in about 500 pounds. The second donation is about 720 pounds. So here on Catawba Reservation, and if you don't know, it's in Rock Hill, we have about 600 tribal members that live on reservation, consisted of about 2,400 tribal household individuals. We do have a kind of grant that goes hand in hand with this. It's called the Local Foods Assistance Program. So what we are able to do at Catawba is to support a lot of local farmers. So if you do own a farm or know somebody that owns a farm, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to buy pretty much any type of vegetables, fruit, or livestock that you do produce. We right now give out about $20,000 to $25,000 worth of food every 2 weeks to our individuals, our Catawba Nation. So it's a very successful program, but also we have a very difficult time getting deer meat back to our community, which is a traditional and cultural meat. So I have been super excited to be able to get that donation. I do appreciate the partnership. And then if y'all do have any questions that you'd like to ask, I'd be happy to answer them. And then I do have our communications director present too, and her name's Tylee.
Thank you, Haley. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions?
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
no questions. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for giving me the opportunity to present tonight. For those in the room that do not know me, my name is Joey Blethen. I'm the Deputy City Manager for the City of TK. I have a bachelor's degree in sports management and a master's in business administration. You will not find a doctor in front of my name or a PhD attached to it. I'm not an expert in the field of deer, but over the last 2 months, I have been given the opportunity to I've been given the opportunity to give council possible paths to move forward to help address our residents' concerns over our deer population. While I do not have the expertise in the field, I have an enthusiasm to learn from those that do and a passion to help the community I have served for 17 years and have called home for the last 12. Tonight, I'm excited to have Dr. DeNicola, a well-respected expert in the field, joining us a little bit later to present his thoughts and possible solutions for our community. Tonight, I will be presenting my after-action report detailing the first phase of our wildlife management program. I'd like to thank Chief Crosby for his guidance in compiling this report, along with City Council, staff, and the USDA for their input. Noel Myers and Jim Edens from the USDA are with us as well tonight to answer any questions you may have. My after-action report will serve as a comprehensive document for our residents that will detail an overview of how we got here, share the outcomes from the wildlife management program, highlight what went well, areas for improvement, opportunities, and challenges in the future. Chief Crosby will be presenting his after-action report following me. He will go into greater detail with the safety plan he, his staff, and USDA implemented for our wildlife management operations. So the first slide that you have before you is an overview of deer surveys that we've completed over the years. The first one began in December of 2015. And then you'll see a large gap there between 15 and 2022. The original study took place in 2015. They noted in the report this number would be high for a wildland situation, but not unusual for a residential situation. Through resident concerns from property damage, health of the herd, aggressive deer activity, future environmental factors, council directed staff to conduct additional surveys that you see before you on 22 in March, September of 22, and then September of 2023. You can see a substantial increase from 2015 to where our last survey was in September of 23 at over 1,000 deer. I think it should be noted with the deer surveys that they are approximation. It should give you a proper range of where you should be at. It could be 200 more, 200 less. It's just an approximate figure. I think it's also important to note that Folkland Management, who conducted our most recent study, had mentioned as part of their report that a goal for year one should be removal of over 30 to 35% of the deer population, which would be around 300 deer. Additional culling should be considered in future years, according to them. The next item that we have is the SCDNR meeting with Dr. Charles Ruth, where he came and spoke to council. He gave an overview of our current deer situation based off of the population, considered the options that we had at the current time, which was culling, sterilization, relocating, or doing nothing. I think at the time it's important to note that relocating is strongly discouraged because of the trauma that it causes to the deer. That was backed up by SCDNR and PETA as well. In September of 2022, we performed a community engagement survey at the encouragement of Dr. Ruth at that study as well, or at the special council meeting as well. We polled residents, and as you can see from the results, it was split about 50-50 with 10-16 voting yes to utilize sharpshooters to cull the herd, and 10-10 voting no. So it shows the true issue of a divided community. Continuing on, in November 14th of 2022, City Council passed an ordinance that would ban the intentional feeding of wildlife. In July 10th of 2023, Council gave the city manager direction to apply for a wildlife management permit. And as part of that, in the first budget workshop, $163,000 was allocated towards a wildlife management program. In September of 2023, the city officially submitted a deer depredation permit to SCDNR requesting permission to cull 75 to 300 deer on city limits. The city officially received approval 8 days later to cull 80 deer. An important part of this process is the city began engaging in conversations about the possible use of Zonistat PZP, which at the time was not an accepted use for deer control by the state of South Carolina. We did receive official approval on that on November 17th from Clemson University. On December 11th, Council introduced an ordinance allowing for the discharge of firearms and firearm-like devices. This will cover in relation related to deer management. So this would include any darting operations along with any sharpshooters that would take place as well. At the December 18th council meeting, Dr. Alan Rutberg presented Zonistat PZP to council, shared opinions on previous researches, applications of it, and how it could possibly be used within our community. Also at that meeting, I presented cost analysis on what it would look like for culling to take place in the community and what a PZP program would look like if staff was to carry that out, and looked at the cost of those. And then on December 18th, council executed the agreement with USDA to officially cull 80 deer. On January 18th, council appealed to the SCDNR to cull an additional 80 deer, receiving approval the following day, with leading us up to being able to cull a total of 160 deer before the March 1st deadline. On January 22nd, City Council approved the updated contract with USDA, and that kind of leads us into our wildlife management program. So the first set of operations were conducted on January 22nd through 24th. What you'll see on the chart that shows a breakdown of each day of how many deer were taken. I know it's tough for people looking, but on January 22nd, it was 4 deer. On January 23rd, it was 13 deer. And then on January 24th, it was a total of 2 deer for 19 that first week. On the second week of operations, on February 5th, you had 6 deer. On February 6th, you had 3 deer. And then on February 7th, you had 8 deer for a total of 36 deer during that operation. This slide here shows a breakdown of the costs as we have them today. Chief Crosby will go in a little more detail on the staffing during his part of the presentation, but I felt like it's important to show a breakdown of the hours utilized by law enforcement to cover the operations with their cost. The USDA cost is approximate at this point because we won't know their official totals until payroll is cut at the end of February. So once I have that number, we will update that officially. So with the operations of everything, as part of the after action report, we then identified what went right, areas for improvement, opportunities, and challenges. So let's go with what went right first. First off, thanks to the outstanding efforts of Chief Crosby and his team and the USDA, everything was carried out safely without any death, injuries, arrests, property damage. So from that standpoint, our number one goal was achieved. It was also identified that based upon the time constraints and flexibility challenges within the site locations that we'll get into a little bit later, the culling of 36 deer was considered a success by the USDA. The city utilized various methods for communication, such as social media, local news media outlets, website, newsflash, physical signage, robocalls, and direct communication with city staff to communicate everything with residents. We also instituted a information line that concerned residents could call, for which we took 43 calls. 33 of those were considered emotionally charged and more venting in nature, and we did not return those, but all additional phone calls were returned. Another strong suit that we believe throughout this process is community engagement, as we've continued to engage with the experts in the wildlife field, as long as concerned residents through council meetings, engagement surveys, and direct communication with not only staff but council as well. It should also be noted the great partnership between the TK Police Department, York County Sheriff Department, and the USDA in carrying all this out as well. The last point I'll talk through is the collection of data. As you can see through the overview, we discussed over a year of collection of data and meetings and subsequent meetings with experts in the fields to try to gather as much information as possible to try to make an informed decision on this. Areas for improvement. Timing between the execution of the USDA contract and the commencement of the wildlife management plan. With the execution of the contract on December 18th, throughout the holidays, it was a quick turnaround to get the operations set up in place to execute that. As part of that, there were some challenges with not being able to provide long-term communication for the residents in preparation for it. Obviously, create a challenge to meet the number of tags that we were allotted before the March 1st deadline. And there were some staff challenges to make sure that we had enough staffing to accommodate those evenings to cover that shift. As part of that, beginning in the process when the permit is issued, if this is the direction council goes again, the earliest we could start is September. So if we went through this route, starting in September would allow for less compression and be able to spread things out a little more. Greater flexibility for the time of operations. This one's a little challenging because it requires more discussion. There's opportunities based off of deer feeding habits. When they're being sighted on the trail cameras, it's 4 to 5 o'clock during the day and not 7, 8 o'clock during the evening. So obviously that comes with challenges because between the daylight hours, you have more activity outside. Then you're considering shutting down the golf course at that point. So every challenge comes with pros and cons to it. So it was identified by our USDA staff, but obviously considering that option comes with challenges. Limited areas to perform the operations. As identified, the spot that makes the most sense is obviously the golf course. Even within the golf course, there are challenges, being respectful of the residents that do live on the golf course and maintaining that. So with the dense area that we have, identifying spots where we can safely conduct this is definitely a challenge that we'll mention later on. Another part that I thought was key that Noel brought up during our meeting with the USDA is he thought it would be beneficial as a city developing a long-term strategy and goals and an objective. Where do we want to get to? We know we want to reduce the deer population for X amount of reasons, but what's an attainable number or goal we want to get to? So something to consider in the future. So future opportunities, continued exploration and possible implementation of non-lethal weapons or options. Dr. DeNicola, who will be joining us later, will go a little further in depth with that. But through various conversations I've had, I think there's some interesting options out there. What was mentioned earlier in the areas to improve, commence the wildlife management program in September, whether it's lethal or non-lethal, I think it would be imperative to have action before the next rut occurs. Consideration of a mobile culling platform. Once again, just like with the greater flexibility of time, that comes with a whole another list of considerations that we would have to go through as part of that because it generates some concerns. Possible increased hours of operation instead of going from 6 to 10, extending that into later on in the evenings. Exploring lengthening the operational period so you don't have that compression. So maybe it's a couple days and then you're off for a month, so on and so forth. Identify alternative sites. There are some other green spaces within the city that we could possibly look at as part of it. Equipment setup would be every night. USDA is having to set up and break down their stands, which takes a considerable amount of time. So looking at opportunities to be able to set that and keep that up there. And then last future opportunity is being able to create a comprehensive, timely communication regarding future wildlife operations, which we've kind of touched base on that I'll go into in a little bit. Future challenges. Clearly, by the poll, it's a divided community in regards to how we deal with the deer population. We've also received feedback from concerned citizens with houses near the site locations that were identified by the USDA. Here's a significant one. The wildlife management program requires a long-term financial commitment. You're looking anywhere between $115,000 to $200,000 a year, depending on what options you select and how many options are implemented. And I believe through my conversations with the experts in the field, this is not something you accomplish in 1 year. You either have to commit to it or do nothing, is what I've learned through these conversations. The last thing that I'll touch on with future challenges is the behavior of the deer. So the deer are kind of creatures of habit, but right now they don't feel any pressure, which allows them to travel at various times of the day, which goes back to the challenges that the USDA had in spotting them. So only culling during the evening hours limits those opportunities to see those deer. In closing, I'll kind of go over the next steps that we've kind of identified. Obviously, continue exploration of wildlife management options, which you'll hear more about tonight. Continue with the deer spotlight surveys, which we have one scheduled already for in August. As Noel had mentioned, develop long-term strategies, goals, and objectives. And then the last thing that we actually just launched this evening is a webpage that's dedicated strictly to wildlife management program in hopes of engaging and educating our community. You'll see the after-action reports that Chief and I completed. You'll see the in-depth reports of the deer spotlight surveys. There's a community education piece that talks about different varieties of landscaping you can utilize, how to avoid deer vehicle accidents, what to do if you have a dead deer in your yard. So just trying to educate our residents as much as you can. Every council meeting that I cited as part of the overview is also linked on that page as well. So if you want to get educated, this is a great opportunity for you to really dive in and learn about deer. So that's all I had. I will turn everything over to Chief Crosby unless y'all have any questions of me. Thank you. It's through council, sorry.
Mayor, members of council, to community, thank you for the opportunity tonight to share with you our after-action report for this operational plan. I think it's important tonight that we begin with some acknowledgement of some people that made this operational plan happen and to what I deem as a success based off my objective. And so I would like to begin by thanking the members of the Tega Police Department for their unwavering commitment to this community. They spent countless hours assisting in the planning process. They adjusted their schedules. They worked late. They came in early for this operational plan. So first and foremost, thank you to them. To Sheriff Tolson and the York County Sheriff's Office, thank you for your partnership. They provided deputies to work with us to ensure that we had adequate coverage for the operational plan. So without him, I could not make this happen. So I really appreciate him and his support. To the United States Department of Agriculture, thank you for your professionalism, your conversations, and your commitment to help us make sure that this was safe. And last but not least, thank you to our community members. Because of you, you gave your cooperation and your compliance, which made this operational plan easier for us, the police department. So I sincerely say thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot. As I noted in my statement to the community, opinions are certainly divided on this topic, on what method to choose and how to address this problem. But One thing remained very consistent, and that was we all believed that safety had to be of the utmost priority and the focus of this operational plan, whatever method was chosen. And when you entered into that agreement with the USDA, it became the police department's responsibility to create an operational plan to make sure that our community was safe. And I assure you, through the many meetings that we attended and through the operational plan itself, that focus was safety was the utmost importance to us. I mean, that's the very core of what we do as law enforcement officers. That's the very core of what Tega is. We stand up here and we say how safe we are. That's who we are. So there was not a chance that this department was going to allow something to happen to where our community was not going to be safe. So we spent countless hours of planning. We spent countless hours in our operational meeting. And we developed an operational plan, but you're all successful business people. We have many successful business people in this community. And you know before you engage in anything, you have to have a goal. What is it that you're trying to achieve? So we established the goal of ensuring that the public, our citizens, the first responders, the USDA, and all individuals associated with this plan, that they would be safe. And that's what we were striving to achieve. Tonight I stand before you and tell you that I'm proud to say that we achieved our goal. We made sure that our city was safe, and we achieved our goal. I want to share with the public tonight, though, and tell them what steps were taken to ensure that they were safe, because it was a considerable amount of information and action steps that were put into place. But there's also a lot of misconceptions, because I know that if I tell you I'm standing on the 10th tee, and that's where the USDA personnel was, it kind of gives a false sense of what's happening. And I know that every time that we say the word safety, before safety is I feel. We have to feel safety. It's not I think safety, it's I feel safety. So my goal tonight is to give the community the information that they need to know, that they know they could have felt safe when this was happening. First and foremost, we started with our operational objective, and I stated that to you, which then led to us to create our operational plan. The operational plan was divided into 3 categories. It was enforcement, visibility, and then also education. Deputy City Manager Blethen covered the educational piece, so I'm not going to go into extent about that, but I will go into detail about the other piece. But first, I'm going to start off with this safety aspect and cover the information in that. In our operational plan, each night, we started with a briefing, and all the individuals involved were told, and it's in the operational plan. It says, a cease operation if any individual, not just me, not just my major, not just my captain, any individual, to include the USDA, felt that it was unsafe and we could not carry out this operation safely, they were to call a cease operation, and we would have stopped right then. It was utmost important that everybody realized that they had control whether this operation will continue or not. In addition to that, each day, about 4:30, the USDA, Major Patterson and Captain Holland, they would do site visits at each location where it was determined we would be at that particular day. Now, we put out that we were going to be on the golf course, and we were. A misconception was that we were located all 18 holes. Well, we were not. Each night we located about 4 locations that we were going to be at, then chose 4 alternate locations. And we went and we inspected each of those locations visually. It was very important for us to make sure that the site picture, and we were all in agreement, that the site picture that was chosen was going to be safe for our residents. I'll give you an example of that. I'm willing to share with you that this was one of the site locations that was chosen. So if I tell you this is the 10th tee at the golf course, if I tell you that one of the locations is the 10th tee or the 10th hole, your perception, and accurate, is that that entire area that you see would be used for the culling program, when in fact, that's the area that was in play. While the USDA officials might have had 180 degrees of view, their sight picture for culling the deer could be as small as 25 degrees. We were very precise in picking locations. Now, what they actually saw was this. But if the deer was not in the green area, that deer was not culled. That deer had to be on the ground in the grassy area to be culled, because we were confident, with the terrain the way it was, the positioning of the USDA personnel, that our community members were safe if we culled that deer. Now, where is that in relation? If you look at the picture on the left, you'll see a yellow arrow. That arrow is pointing down to an embankment where the USDA personnel was at. So that USD personnel was down in the embankment utilizing the terrain to make sure that our citizens were safe. And every day we went out, we inspected these areas visually to ensure that we were all in agreement that our community would be safe with the places that were chosen. As I told you, each night we had a nightly briefing. At those nightly briefings, the safety protocols were discussed. The officers were able to see the USDA personnel. The USDA personnel were able to see the officers. We discussed the operational plans. We used Google Maps to highlight where officers were going to be staged at, where the USDA personnel was going to be at, to ensure we had the proper coverage for that particular operational period. The USDA also had some safety protocols. They utilized vision enhancement resources at nighttime. They were able to see a lot of things in their field of vision. If they were to see anything, or if an officer saw anything, USDA personnel immediately rendered their weapon safe, placed the weapon on the ground, and the weapon was not touched until all parties agreed that the area was clear. Now, to communicate this, instead of trying to use cell phones or some other means, USDA personnel was given radios, so they had direct contact with us. We had direct contact with them, and there was no delays in that information being passed along to one another. Our officers were also staged in strategic locations. If you were out riding around, I got some emails from some people that said, I saw unmarked officers, and their perception was that the officers was involved in the culling, or actually the ones culling. They were not. Those officers were parked in strategic locations to make sure that the individuals did not access the golf course. So they were watching the cart paths, the walking paths, to make sure that no one would access the golf course in those areas. We had also put out signs, but we understood through the educational process that some people may not have heard it on the news. They may not have had the algorithm for Facebook. They may not have seen the information. So we utilized yard signs, or what I call political signs for those of you that just ran for the campaign. It was the signs that you put out. It was making people aware that the golf course was closed, no trespassing. And we put that at all the access points to the public so that they could be aware of that information as well. For this period, for both periods, 6-day periods, we had a total of 5 calls for service. 3 of those were for individuals that were found to be on or getting ready to access the golf course. All of those were self-initiated by officers. We found the individuals, we stopped everything, and everyone was safe. All 3 individuals were not even in locations to where the culling processing was happening, so they were never in danger. You heard Deputy City Manager Blethen talk about the flexibility needed for the additional hours and things such as that. And we had some lengthy discussions about trying to make some adjustments. The USDA had cameras up to where you were able to see the deer population and see them moving, when were they being very active. As I started this off with, my charge from the very beginning was to make sure that the city was safe, and that's what I focused on. The decisions that I made were not based on how many deer were culled. My decisions were based off, was my community safe? And so when we had these discussions, if we started earlier, then I was taking the risk of individuals being on the cart paths. I was taking the risk of individuals walking to and from a certain location, and I was not willing to take that risk. It was asked, could we go later? We had individuals, and you received emails because you forwarded them to me, in regards to our community members hearing sounds associated with the operational plan, and it voiced their concerns for being scared. So based off upon that, I felt like it was necessary for us not to go later, because I did not want our community members to be startled and scared and then take a course of action that could end up in someone getting injury. Again, my priority was safety. I wanted to make sure that this community was safe, and that's why I made the decisions that I made. A big piece of this was our visibility in the operational plan. In total, we had 65 officers that participated in this operational plan. In total, 29 TK police officers worked this operational period. 21 York County deputies worked the operational period, and 15 members of the command staff were out each night working for the operational period, for a total of 316.5 hours. Now, these officers were paired in 2-person teams, and that was a very strategic move on our part, because if we utilized 1-person vehicles and spread the officers out, and we had a situation where officers had to respond to something, then we would have had to pull another officer to come and assist that officer with that situation. leaving that area exposed and potentially shutting down the operation again. So for officer safety and for those reasons, we teamed officers in pairs so they could address any situation that they may face. I want to speak to you about the enforcement action and the direction that the officers were given. As y'all know, we pride ourselves on community policing. We love our partnership with our community. And so the officers were told for them to evaluate the situation based off the information that they had and then utilize the proper enforcement actions needed to change that behavior. And the example that was given, if you come across someone that they're walking their dog and you're speaking with them and they said, look, I'm sorry, I didn't know anything was happening tonight or this week, I apologize, and they go on, there's no need for enforcement actions. That behavior has been changed, we gain compliance, we can go on. If an individual is found to be out and about and they were told if the person says, I'm here to disrupt what's happening, I'm here to cause problems, then they had to decide how to address that situation to change that behavior. But I'm proud to report, because as I acknowledged the public being cooperative and compliant, we had 0 arrests, we issued 0 citations, and we were effective that night and those 6 days keeping everyone safe. So let's talk about what went well from a police standpoint. First and foremost, as was mentioned earlier, is our cooperation with the York County Sheriff's Office. And again, I cannot thank Sheriff Tolson enough for his support and his deputy support. They really helped us with this endeavor. We utilized a web-based program called Sign Up Genius. It's something that we use for our off-duty assignments. That was very helpful for us to coordinate our planning of our officers to ensure that we had coverage for this operational plan, but also we had to keep officers on the road to answer the calls for service. So we had to make sure we had sufficient labor to do that. Operational briefings each night with the USDA. The officers found that to be very helpful, so that communication took place. They knew where they were going. They knew what their assignments was. They knew what the expectation was, and most importantly, they knew what the safety protocols were. Including the USDA in our operational briefings. Having a dedicated dispatcher for this operational plan. We had one dispatcher that was assigned to all 6 nights that took all the radio traffic, kept notes for us. So that person was a great asset for us. Assigning radios to the USDA members were found to be very beneficial, and having a designated point person from that group, so that way we could obtain information from them about what they were seeing and any additional action plans or action steps that they were wanting. And then the utilization of the ICS, or the Incident Command System, for the planning of resources and the documentation of this operational period. Areas of improvement, as the Deputy City Manager indicated, the communication plan. Not anyone's fault, but from the time that the plan was approved till we had to execute it was what we were given. So we'd like to have seen a little bit more time so we could have a communication strategy to give to the public a little bit more. And then the operation was quite taxing on the organization. I mean, as you can imagine, officers were out 11, 12 o'clock at night by the time it was wrapped up. Some of us had to come back to work early the next morning. So it put a strain on the organization. And then also, we'd like to give earpieces to the USDA so that way they could utilize the radios a little bit more, because it was hard with the trying to stay quiet because of the deer. So next time if you approve it, we'll give them radios with earpieces in them. So I began this by sharing their objective: to ensure a safe and secure environment for our residents, public, first responders, and USDA personnel. 0 loss of life, 0 injuries, 0 property damage. I'm proud to report to you that we were successful in this operational plan of keeping our community safe. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Do you have any questions? Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Chief, thank you very much.
Mayor, if I can, as Dr. DeNicola comes up, both of these after-action reports are on our website now. We have as Joey mentioned, we have a page now dedicated to wildlife management. So for those that are listening at home, those that are here and they want to see more of the details that are included in those reports, those are online at this point.
Council, before Dr. DeNicola starts, did you have any questions for the USDA that is here?
Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'll just open it up to whatever questions you might have for USDA.
First of all, thanks for the undertaking that you and your men went through, and thanks to Chief and city staff. I know this was no small undertaking, and we recognize the pressure that's put on the community. This is a big undertaking for our city, probably the biggest in, maybe second biggest in my tenure living here in 18 years. So we appreciate your involvement and your professionalism, how your people handle themselves. So I want to say thank you, first of all, for that. A couple questions that I may have for you as you listen to the reports this evening. I would guess that you probably had some input on that, and I can appreciate some of the challenges that you and your team had trying to feel like you were successful in harvesting the number of deer that we challenged you with. That said, can you share maybe some of the differences that you've seen in this phase of us going through this process, some differences that you've seen elsewhere that might have helped us to be more successful?
Well, the biggest challenge with any decision on urban deer management is getting to the point where you're looking at the culling of deer. It is an emotionally charged situation because you're dealing with white-tailed deer. The best thing you, at least in our opinion, is you kind of took that initial step. Now, it's not that it's not the only step that can be looked at, which I believe has been really beneficial through all the interactions with Dr. Rutledge, Mr. Charles Ruth, who's the South Carolina big game coordinator, and we also have Tony DeNicola coming up here, who's an expert in this area as well. So for Wildlife Services, we look at it as an integrated approach, trying not to look at one method to resolve the problem. But a lot of times when you start looking at this, particularly on high densities of deer, you got to look at what your goal is, what you want to establish, and basically based upon the survey information, the recommendation from the survey design that was done here, it was over 300 deer need to be removed. Again, that's really comes down to the city council or the community to kind of decide that. So in our expertise, you know, were we successful? Yes, we did it safely, and that's always our ultimate goal as well as with Chief as mentioned up here. More importantly, though, trying to get to that number and looking at some of the challenges that we had, the flexibility, the safety concerns, everything, you kind of have to develop that as you kind of go through the process. There was a lot of things that we had to jump through. I think the best thing the chief showed was that window of view. You have 180 degrees, but you're really kind of narrowing it down to that small area for a safe and lethal shot to remove that deer from that area. But again, all the disturbance, all these things come into play. So all of a sudden now you start having other things that kind of make things a little bit more challenging. And that's some of the things that we kind of figured out and have to address, and then going forward with a long-term strategy. So we've done this in all other communities. We've had the greater flexibility, but again, it comes down to the safety, and those were the decisions that were made.
I think we'd all agree with your assessment and Chief and Joey Blethen that the greatest success of this was the safety aspect, and no negative incidents, no problems for us to speak of. I think those of us that wanted to see us go through this piece of this process were expecting greater results from the harvest, and I think that's probably a secondary value when we look at public safety. So I'm really grateful for how that worked out, and I'd look forward to maybe having additional conversations with you and the team that you worked with from the city on developing a more long-term plan.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
One of the things that was brought up was the time that you were given in order to accomplish this, because there was a delay in getting started from September until January, right? And part of that in the conversation with you talked about the feeding of the deer and the baiting and developing habits so that they're easier to predict. Can you give us a little bit more insight of what additional timing to prepare for that process would look like, so that there is a larger success rate if we're going to undertake something like this again?
I guess in talking with my team and also talking for these action reports, you receive the permit, I think, as early as September 15th, and it goes through March 31st. That's your time frame. because there's challenges here from the standpoint of when we can do operations and do it safely, limiting the golf course area, because that is the other restriction, is you're kind of confined to one small area. You're going to have to kind of whittle away from it, in our opinion, and kind of have that longer window to actually start doing this. So think about it from this standpoint. If you start in early September, these operations might not start until 10 o'clock at night and go to 2 or 3 in the morning. There's whole types of challenges. This is how Wildlife Services operates, but then we have to consider the police department, what resources they have available, different things like that. So that's some of the things that need to be considered for future management.
Wait, so obviously, you know, it was safe. That was awesome. Most important goal. I think everyone was a little shocked at the only harvesting 36 deer. So my question is, and it just maybe an opinion you'd have to give if you're willing, is if we went from September to March, would it even be possible to get the number of deer we would need to get? Or are we looking at it's not possible, or we'd have to do it every night for 6 months? You know, I'm trying to understand if this is even a reasonable potential to continue.
To get to your 80, absolutely. I think you can do it from that September to March timeframe. You probably even get to 180. You could probably do that because that's the maximum that the state allowed for this. Again, you're still looking at a high number of deer in this area, but it's the start, how far it moves that needle. Kind of as was mentioned, that's where the survey information comes in on kind of monitoring the trends and what's going on. So again, it really comes down to having a little bit more flexibility, being able to do it longer time frame, having kind of those communications in place and kind of going forward. Number of nights and stuff like that, it's hard to predict deer. We see them on camera, we see them feeding and everything, but at the same time, when we come in and disturb an area or something like that, moving into that site, we see the deer up in the backyards just laying down. There's nothing that we can do about it. So they were there, but they're not there when we're there. That's kind of the challenge with kind of the limitations that we had. Yep.
If I could piggyback on Councilman Heislip's question. So the average deer that you were able to harvest was about 6 a night over the 6 nights, right? So if we have September to March, to take out 200 deer to try and reduce the population of the deer, that's 33 nights. Is that something doable over a 6-month period for you and your team?
It is possible.
Okay.
Again, it comes with a price tag.
Yeah, it does. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Do we have any further questions? Okay.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, sir.
Okay. Now, Dr. DeNicola.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I appreciate the invite, and I'll try to make good use of your time. I do feel a little rude in these scenarios where my back is to most of the people, so I apologize in advance. So what I'd like to do is kind of do an overview of kind of options in general. You heard this 1,000 times, but I hope I can share insights because I've been doing this for 30 years. I've done hundreds of projects, whether it's lethal or non-lethal. I've seen everything upside down and backwards, and I feel sorry for USDA because they were doomed to fail coming into this scenario. And I can elaborate on that another time. But you know, safety is always priority. But the safest thing to do is to never shoot, right? But ultimately, you have to shoot in order to remove deer. So you have to have parameters under which you can operate to do these types of programs effectively. So you have good people. It's just trying to make sure there's enough flexibility around operations and thinking about, you know, making sure you can meet your goals. So we can talk a little bit. My goal tonight is to talk more broadly and then talk more about fertility control and how it may be integrated into your plans as a whole or not. The one thing I always tell my audience is I really don't care what you do, right? I live in Connecticut. So if you all have 800 deer in Tega, South Carolina, it doesn't bother me. So I'm not here to give a sales pitch. I hope to inform you enough where you can appreciate what you've gotten into, which you appreciate now. You've waded in, you see how ugly it is, and now you'll either decide to say, we're not going this way, or we just need some more information to think about how we're going to move forward. So hopefully I can help you with that. So these are the general 4 options that I would consider. Introducing predators, relocation, they're not even on the radar. That's not even worth wasting time. Controlled hunting in a community like this, pretty meaningless in terms of what it would contribute to your overall harvest. And all it's going to do is create a lot of problems because you'd probably have archery tackle. You're going to have deer running and dying on neighbors' yards. Creates a lot of angst for very little total harvest. So socially, not worth it. And trap and euthanasia, which has utility, but flavor for your community and looking around, not going to fly, right? It can work where you capture animals, euthanize them. It's usually used in areas, whether it's a safety issue, which it does help moderate that, but it's more an issue of trying to, in most states, we don't have a limit here, we have firearm discharge restrictions. So in some areas, the hunting restrictions, say it has to be 450 feet from a house, applies to professionals. So imagine trying to have to be 450 feet from a house in this community. It would be almost impossible. Or you'd be standing in the middle of the fairway, right, and you'd be shooting back towards the houses. So that's most of the time where that method is used. Could be considered, but my guess is it would not be looked upon favorably by a community. My personal opinion, talking to people, looking at the folks in your audience, it would be challenging. Could be discussed. So the other option, which when you consider safety, right? There was Joey mentioned, Mr. Blethen mentioned the mobile shooting. Right? That's a very common method when you're sharpshooting. So now instead of having one shooter at each location, you have a team that can cover all those sites in one night. And it's much more efficient, therefore more cost saving. The challenge still is you need safe places to shoot. Right? I just spent 2 hours in your community. I've been in your community a year ago. And you look at all the backdrops and where the houses are, and it's tricky, right? You guys are pretty built out. So when you look at sharpshooting as a tool, yes, it is the most cost-effective means of meeting an end in most environments. There's no question that Tega K is on the edge of what I've seen, and I've seen many, many, many communities around the country, of being an extremely challenging sharpshooting environment. And so the chief is warranted in his concerns due to the large human activity, the marginal shooting zones. It's very, very difficult. I'm not saying it's an easy proposition, all things considered. So part of my PhD was on developing and testing injectable fertility control agents. And I was in that research game for many years. And from that, I discerned a lot of frustration. How my hair is not gray, I have no idea. I have good genetics, at least in that respect. But it's a very frustrating element in that, it's often hard to get near the deer. But drive around this community 24/7, you have, I hate to use the word dumb because it feels insulting to the animal, but you have dumb, I call it approachable deer everywhere, right? You can just about throw a snowball at them, right? You don't have snowballs, but back home we have snowballs. So they're very approachable. With a dart gun, you can, what we say, engage. You can engage that animal, secure it for treating it, right, for preventing conception in that animal. And you can do that safely, and you can do it from the roads, and you can handle a lot of animals, where if you have a firearm, it's a whole nother situation in terms of the safety scenario that you're working in. So in these environments that are densely developed, heavily roaded, as in roads, that tool actually almost somehow seems logical. I've always thought it's crazy, except in very unique circumstances, but when you get into neighborhoods and communities like this, it almost feels more logical than trying to force a lethal method into such a context of heavy development. So these are the general things I look at, and you need to be thinking about, right? In terms of these are the variables. I come into any community, I drive around, I look at Google Earth before I get there, right? How big is it? You guys are small, right? That's easy, but you got a ton of deer. I'll tell you, you don't have 1,000 deer, I'd put every nickel I have in the bank that you don't have 1,000 deer. You have a lot of deer, right? So you still have to think about those relative numbers and how many you want to reduce. And to the point that Joey made is, what's your objective? It's not always a number. You don't want to go from 500 to 200. It's, I want 50% less homeowner complaints. I want X number of fewer deer vehicle collisions from a public safety perspective. Those are more the goals you set, and as you manage your population, you see if you're meeting those conflicts. So the absolute numbers of deer are not always relevant. They're usually correlated, but they're not exactly relevant. When you're doing lethal methods, as Joey mentioned, in order to stabilize a deer population, you need to cull about 30 to 40%. That stabilizes it. If you really want to reduce it, you're going to need to kill 50% or more of those animals to see a measurable and noticeable decrease in that population. That's a lot of deer when you're talking about TKK. When you're looking at a fertility control project, you have to get upwards of 80% of those females rendered infertile to start seeing a population decline. So that's very significant when you have a lot of deer. You have a lot of people. You have a lot of houses, right? That impacts all your decisions on what methods you're using. Thankfully, your state agency is very flexible in the permitting. I work in a lot of states. They'll make you stand on your head and twirl, juggle, balls and before you can go out and do anything in the field. South Carolina is very generous and liberal, so be appreciative of that, because most states do not want to see anything but hunting, and that really puts you in a hard position as a community. Are you allowed on just the golf course? Are you allowed on private properties? That's a big difference in how you can approach a project, right? Whether you're lethal or non-lethal. If you're darting a deer, you don't know if it's going to fall on the golf course or fall on Mrs. Smith's yard. So you have to be able to work with your community to make sure that they're accepting of those methods, or without that public acceptance, you're never going to have the support to move whatever method you want forward. Very critical. Are people feeding, right? So if you're out there trying to sharpshoot and you have 20 people out there with piles of corn in their yard, it's going to be very hard to get those deer coming to your corn pile. Is it a big year with acorn crops? So if you come here in September and all the oak trees are dropping, they're not going to come eat the corn for you to shoot them, right? All those things aren't just little tidbits of data. They're real. You'll sit in a tree stand and look at deer eating acorns, and they're not going to come visit. And so you're going to spend a lot of money not being productive, right? So you kind of have to look at all those elements before you start going, hey, I want to shoot, or I want to do fertility control. You have to put the package together, or you're going to keep taking a step forward and 2 steps back, and you're going to get very aggravated in the process. So sharpshooting. I'd like to point out, and I'm not here to speak philosophically, but there's a difference between lethal and non-lethal, and humane and inhumane, right? You can be humane and lethal, right? That's how the AVMA develops standards to euthanize cattle or pigs, or I work on the AVMA depopulation panel, and we're expert at trying to cull animals in a non-confined environment. And what methods can you use to actually be termed humane, right? We can euthanize animals in a way, as USDA probably did, doesn't mean just because they're killing that it's inhumane. So that's important to recognize that distinction. Obviously, if I shoot a deer lethally, there's one less in TKK. If I dart a deer and sterilize it, there's the same number of deer in TKK, right? It's not adding deer in the future, but recognize that it's basic, right? These are distinct through those simple logical concepts that every deer culled is one less and it's not reproducing. You could donate meat, which folks are very appreciative of your project. And the cost compared, as we'll get into with fertility control, is substantially less if things are designed and permitted to operate in a way. In general, if you compare across all the projects that have been done across the U.S. for the last 3 decades, if you compared fertility control cost per deer to lethal, it's probably 2 to 3 to 1. That non-lethal is 2 to 3 times as expensive per animal handled than a lethal project. Okay, so in general, those are your notions. As you've seen, there's some people that aren't real happy when you decide to kill deer, right? And how unhappy are they, and how many of them are they? That's the political question that has to be answered. And then, at least like as I've seen here, you've passed an ordinance that allows firearm discharge, right? There aren't any other constraints in the county. The state's permitting it, so you don't have those limits that are often in place in many other areas. Again, we're back to humane versus lethal or non-lethal. Is darting a deer humane? I don't know. I'm not the deer getting darted, right? Or rendering it infertile, right? Those are, again, other questions you need to think about. It's non-lethal, right? And there's often across the board, in most communities, you have 50% against lethal, but if you said how many people would support fertility control, you'd probably get 80% or more. That's pretty common because, again, there's not the controversy, you're not killing animals, and it offers that public acceptance. One factor of many, right? So, again, thankfully your state agency would actually consider fertility control. Again, most states will just say, not an option. You either kill them with hunting or sharpshooting or other methods, or you live with your deer. You're not going to get an immediate reduction. I sterilize those deer, but then they have to die, right? You have to wait for them to die before your population goes down. It's an obvious point, but it's like you have to think about those things in this process. It may keep your problem from getting worse, right? But it's better than doing nothing if that's your choice, because otherwise you keep having fawns or they're getting hit by cars or getting stuck on fences, but it's not going to give you immediate reduction. Those deer don't disappear after they're handled. And it's costly, right? And we can get a little bit into that. And I always ponder how much time to spend on this slide, right? I can spend hours talking about immunocontraception versus sterilization, the physiological differences between the approaches, yada, 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 right? But in general, and I'm sure you've seen some of the information that Joey's provided, you've probably read, hopefully not too much of it because you fall asleep, but immunocontraception is basically that was the gold standard, right? I started working with the best people back in the early 90s, and we said, we're going to come up with this magic juice that you're going to inject in the deer, and it's never going to breed again. And we literally laughed at lunch, and I could picture the face of the two experts that I was working with, and they go, "It's so stupid to sterilize deer. I can't even believe people talk about it." This is 30 years ago, and you're going to hear me talk about it. So you can call me stupid if you like. So you have two different vaccines that have materialized over the last 30 years, okay? There's this GnRH called Gonacon, right? That was produced by the USDA, the sister organization. That is their research branch. I've done pivotal trial on that. We're actually part of the registration process. So any of these injectable fertility control agents they used to be regulated by FDA. They said, we don't want to deal with this. So they threw it to EPA. So EPA has it as a pest management tool, and they have to approve it. But you still have to go through no different than Roundup or these other agents. They have to do the trials and look at the safety to the animals and to the human consumers potentially. A lot of work. This is deer. This is like, there's not a lot of money. So you're not developing a COVID vaccine with billions of dollars. You've got hundreds of thousands. So this research is very slow. I have to find research projects where the community, for example, wants to hopefully get the benefit of the research, and then the government, whoever I'm working with, gets the benefit of getting the data, right? So you're trying to do this matchmaking and nothing, you get compromised data, it's slow in coming, and so 30 years later, you have Gonacon, because it's the government, is registered with EPA. It's not registered in South Carolina. That would be another step. But it at least jumped through the hoop. And then we talked about PZP and Spayvac. They're both the same. So a vaccine has an antigen, which is the protein, and it has an adjuvant, which stimulates the immune system to do its job, right? Which is to prevent, in our case, reproduction. Those two are the same. They use the same antigen, the same protein, with a cocktail, we'll call it. Those prevent the egg from joining with the sperm. So those deer, we'll talk about, come into estrus, right? So you have the rut here, probably early November, late October. Well, what happens here is those deer, if they don't get pregnant, 28 days later, they come in heat again. And they do that for 4 months, sometimes 5 months. And we'll talk a little bit about those behavioral things you need to think about without being overwhelmed, but they're all considerations when you're looking at these options. When you look as a whole, you go to surgical sterilization. And a tubal ligation, just like they do in women, you still leave your ovaries in your uterus, but you just sever the connection. So you do that in deer, you get this same behavior where they come in estrus, it's unsuccessful, the breeding, because the sperm can't get to the egg, and then they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again, right? And they'll do that into February or March. With an ovariectomy, that eliminates the hormones, right? So now there is no estrus, because they have no ovaries, there's no eggs, nothing happens, right? So that's where we favor an ovariectomy. We're doing a crazy project on Staten Island, New York, and New York City, where hopefully none of you ever go. And that does the same thing. We have now done vasectomies to over 2,500 male deer on Staten Island. If you can imagine that insanity. It's working though. Our deer vehicle collisions are down over 75%. They were over 300 on the island, and the population is down by 50%. But huge undertaking, right? But that does the same thing as the PZP and the tubal ligation, right? The male is not viable, so he breeds the female. She does not get pregnant, and then she comes into estrus again and again, right? So we're actually doing extensive studies, looking at the movements, using radio collars, and seeing if those deer are spending more energy because they're not getting bred the first time. Anyway, so there's a lot of work that goes on around this to understand it, but that's kind of high level on how those different options play out. Ultimately, the same goal. You're trying to keep a deer from reproducing. So we don't have real legal restrictions with sterilization other than getting a permit from the state. It allows you to capture deer, handle deer, right? Those are all requirements. The deer are owned by the people of South Carolina, managed by the DNR. That's their responsibility. But with the vaccines, and again, you have the literature, you can read the details. Each of those vaccines have different registration status, right? And that will hinder your ability to use them in the field. And then I'll get in a little bit on which ones create more complexities on having to give more injections, right, in order to get the effectiveness of the vaccine. But as a whole, legally, not too bad. You can work around to have some fertility options. Deer behavior is how approachable your deer. Your deer are pretty approachable. I had some today, I could have just opened the door and hit them by accident, right? And they just stand on the side of the road. So, from that perspective, it makes it reasonably feasible to dart these animals and get a lot of those animals handled fast. They're not running when you stop the car and they stop at 80 yards away, right? They're easy to work with. So that's very important when you're looking at whether fertility control can be an option. And part of that ties in, and this is hard to keep these things simple in 20 minutes, is as dumb as these deer seem, if you start shooting at them with firearms, you start shooting darts at them, they start going, what the heck is going on, right? They're not that dumb. And that light bulb goes on pretty fast, and they start to learn. So it's thinking about what the deer look like now, but I need them to look like they look now behaviorally every year. Or eventually, the deer just run away where you can no longer be successful. So that ties into the deer's behavior, and how it changes ties into which method we'll use. Behavioral outcome is what I spoke of earlier, where do the deer continually come in estrus, or do they have no estrus at all? So we need to think about whether that has any concern. I can't remember what your deer vehicle collision data, but they weren't that high here. For some communities, you don't want to potentially increase that risk by having continued breeding behavior. But if that's not really a concern and it's more landscape and native vegetation, different issue. And then effectiveness, if I remove your ovaries, if I sever your fallopian tubes, or I give you a vasectomy, you're done. Not 99.9%, 100% of the time, you're not reproducing anymore. The challenge with the vaccines are, just like with COVID or any vaccines that are administered, everybody's different, right? And you have different immune responses. So typically vaccines, if they're working well and depending on a specific population, the best you're going to get is 95%, the best. There's always are going to be what we call non-responders, deer that physiologically just don't respond strongly enough to prevent their reproductive activity from ceasing or preventing conception. Typically 10%. So even if you treated 100% of the deer in TKK 10% of them are still going to be reproducing. So then you start doing these computational models, and you say, okay, if we have 100 deer and we have 50 females, and 90% of them are treated, but we still have 10% that aren't, that's still 10 females. And each female has, say, 1 fawn each. So did 10 deer die out of the 100 each year? You better hope more than that died, or you're just going to stay in that same place, right? So that's very important when you think about a surgery versus a vaccine, is there is no 100% effective vaccine, especially when it comes to fertility control. So again, another variable when you're trying to weigh which method you'd move forward with. This starts getting more complicated, but hopefully you'll stay with me, all right? There's all these aspects that I think of, right? I have to think about these things because I have to swear at the deer. I have to have the reason why the program worked or didn't work at the end of the day, right? So it's, when you look at those vaccine options, right, there is, Joey mentioned terminology, Zonistat B. That was the original preparation of PZP by the Humane Society. Very rudimentary. Worked, but you had to give at least a second shot before it would work. And then you needed at least another one the next year for it to last at least another couple years. So that's 3 times you have to dart that animal. With that preparation, you do not need to tag the deer. When it was registered, you write all these criteria with EPA, and it says in there you can dart deer without tagging. With GNRH, the Gonacon, in their label, it says they have to be tagged. So they would have to be captured first, put the ear tag in, the cattle ear tag, and then you would hand inject the deer, okay? But you could start seeing, do I capture the deer and tag it and then hand inject it once? But then that vaccine, what we find is about 90% effective with 1 injection. If you don't booster that deer the next year, give it another injection, which you can do remotely, it drops to 50% effectiveness. So now you're flipping a coin whether that deer, that female is going to have fawns the next year if you don't get to it again. That's not so good when you're the one trying to chase them all and have to get the dart in them again, right? So when you're thinking about that and you look at what the accelerated education, I call education when they go from the dumb deer to the deer that look at you cross-eyed when you look like you're doing something different than every other community member that's walking their dog or blowing leaves. Like, they start teasing it out. Your car slows down too suspiciously next to them, they run away. They don't stand there. And so the more you, I call it, harass them with these treatments, the more they really start to cue in those little differences in who is a risk to them and who is just a dog walker. And you'll be amazed how they figure that out. They know which dog is behind the electric fence. They know which dog chases them out of the yard. They have that all figured out. They're not dumb. So the other thing that happens, and I'm not trying to dissuade anything. Again, my mission here is to have you have as much information as possible so you're making as clear and concise of a decision as you can for yourselves and the community. All right? So I'm not bad-mouthing anything. They get abscesses. And I don't need to get into all the medical aspects of it, but you're injecting a liquid, and it's an oil-based liquid into the animal's muscle, or you're darting it. And so that animal goes, the animal's body goes, that's foreign, right? Doesn't belong here. And that's what causes that immune system to attack it and affect reproduction. But what it also does is the body's, this is an oil, they're oil-based, so it doesn't get absorbed. And so the deer's body or the horse's body is like, what do I do with this, right? And so they encapsulate it, right? That's how the body protects itself from that foreign item. No different if you got a nail in a deer's leg, right? It jumped the fence or a piece of wire. The body will encapsulate it. So they get these abscesses, and they vary, right? It may be a golf ball. It may be, we've had them as big as a softball in a deer's leg, okay? I'm not trying to scare you, but it's like these are realities. So if you're darting these same deer multiple times, you're creating these exposure sites. Not only are those dart sites not treated if you darted them remotely, right? Because you don't capture it, and then we give them pain relief medication. We give them a bolus of antibiotic injection. You give local treatment to the dart site, right? We have veterinarians that are doing this, right? So there's a different treatment and handling of that animal, whether I'm capturing it and tagging it or whether I'm remotely injecting it. So when I say hand injection, I'll show you in a minute. So it's dart treatment. And then if you decide to go with a vaccine that you don't tag, and USDA, you partner, and they're still shooting, they're not going to know, right? The people that might be treating them know the deer by the, the little tear in the ear or the patch of hair missing. They don't know what that is. How are they going to see? It's going to be after dark, possibly. And the same with the treatments. Once these deer start learning to avoid the corn pile and they come at dark, you're not going to be able to tell the difference, right? So all those little details start to make non-capture. It's more work, right? Instead of just darting it and driving away because I gave it the vaccine, I have to follow it, find it, right? Give the ear tags, which I'll show you how that works so you can appreciate it. So there's shortcuts, right, that are easy up front, but long-term, it's going to take more time, resources, and energy if you don't tag those animals. The other study we've done is if you have an animal in hand, and I take a syringe and I inject it into the muscle, I know it's in there. If I shoot a dart, right, that thing's flying fast, it bounces off, it doesn't always completely inject. And we've shown there's a substantial reduction in the efficacy of the vaccine, not because the vaccine's different, it's just not fully injected into the animal's muscle. And so you lose some of the effectiveness by delivering it with a dart versus capturing it and giving it a hand injection. So again, not trying to overcomplicate it. There's a lot of factors. Joey's done a phenomenal job pulling this all together. And the other benefit, and I'll advise Joey, when they do their next population count for you, spotlighting, they should incorporate what's called distance sampling, which you don't just count the deer, you measure the distance of those deer along the road, which you call a transect, and they can also get a better, I would venture to guess, a more accurate representation of your population size in the community. And it doesn't take any more time. You just have a different data sheet, and you say, okay, 5 deer at 50 yards. And then there's a software program that does a calculation. So I would suggest you incorporate that. But the advantage of capturing and tagging now, and again, we're not going to get into statistics of deer population estimation, but if you have a tagged portion of your population, right, you can more accurately project the population size, right? Because you have a portion that's known versus all the deer look the same, right? And so it has added benefit to afford you better ability to estimate that population over time. Along with, which I won't underestimate or understate, is monitor those conflicts, right? How many people are yelling at Joey because their flowers got eaten, right? Or there's a dead deer stuck on their fence, right? How do those things change over time so your community is satisfied with what you've moved forward with? So this is what it actually looks like, but it doesn't look like this anymore. So this photo is probably ancient. It's probably 15 years old. So we literally used to, this was a pivotal trial with Gonacom. We used to inject it in the muscle of the hindquarter. That's common, unless you're doing livestock, because you don't want to inject the cow in a prime cut of meat with a vaccine or antibiotic treatment, right? You do it in the neck. But the deer can groom these areas, right? And they get irritated. So now when you have the deer in hand, we inject between the shoulder blades, right? And it seems to sit better, create less reactions there than in muscles that are more active, like the legs. So that's kind of what it looks like, but it is literally a syringe with a white emulsion in it that you inject into the animal. In comparison, again, this seems really crazy to do a sterilization on a wild deer. We bring these animals in to a controlled environment. This is actually Cornell, where they're like, this was so absurd, my head spun, and I was like, there's no way we're doing this. They got this thing intubated. It took 5 hours per deer. By the time they transported it, all these crazy vets that are used to working on $2 million racehorses are working on this deer. I'm like, this is like the $1 million deer. But it gives you a sense that, it's an involved process. And I got to this because I was darting deer. I've darted thousands and thousands and thousands of deer. And I get tired of doing it. and I get particularly tired of doing it to the same deer. And so I was getting so frustrated, going a con, next year, dart it again, 1 or 2 years later, capture the thing again, give it another injection. That deer's starting to like know my name. He sees my truck coming, right? And it's like, they get smart. So I'm like, if I'm gonna hold this, and I've got full-time veterinarians on my staff, I'm like, if I'm gonna capture this thing, we started doing research out in California, looking at going with, all different types of surgical procedures. Anyway, we looked at this 1,000 Ways to Sunday, and we're just going back to an old, simple approach like a spay on a cat or a dog. And we did our first project outside of St. Louis, Missouri. We did 100 deer there, and it went smooth as you can imagine. Dense neighborhoods, like not as dense as here. Captured these deer, no complications. I'll discuss some of that. But it was like, this isn't so bad. I never have to see number 1, number 10, number 50 ever again. And if every time I see them they're running, I don't care because I don't ever have to treat them again, right? That's critical. And if they're tagged and you're integrating a lethal project into that, they can work around your deer versus wasting energy treating an animal and then it gets a different, we could even do a vaccine and then you're driving around darting and it's not tagged and then I capture an animal that didn't need to be captured because it's already treated and then you sterilize it and you wouldn't know it, right? So the tagging has a lot of significance around if you're doing a multi-pronged approach, which I do advocate for. Best you can see that, this is a community, they call it the Villages. It's half the size of Tega Cay. It's in San Jose, California. And golf community, we sterilized about 110 deer in there the first year. Dense, more dense than you guys are. But those deer are living in all those little neighborhoods, if not more approachable than your deer. They are now actually complaining. We have people in that community up to 5 years ago complaining that they have too few deer now. Hurts my head, right? I never thought I could catch them all, never mind get too many of them. That property is fenced where it goes up into hill country. And then it's open with a gate. And so we have it like you have a peninsula, so it's reasonably contained. We don't have any immigration. So I literally sterilized every female in that population. And 10 to 15% every year. So the people that love the deer were panicking, right? Because they literally, no deer were working inside the gate, which they used to do. And yeah, so they actually shut that down. They were actually so crazy, they actually cut holes in their fence and were putting corn to try to attract new deer in. So when you think you guys aren't crazy, I'll find out. But this is where people go with these things, right? And it's like, so you need the long-term plan. And where do you want to be? And how do you get there? So if we're going to let deer in, we might need to come up with a flexible fertility, a vaccine for those deer, and let some reproduce, some not, right? You need a plan going forward. So how do we do this? These are basic, they're like a paintball gun, right? And they're air-powered. And they can shoot a dart that has a vaccine in it, or they can shoot a dart that has an immobilization, an anesthetic-type drug in it. When we're trying to capture them, we have little micro-transmitters in the dart, like a little low jack. So when you dart the animal, the dart stays on the animal, and then you could follow it with a tracking device. So if it runs over the golf course and down in the valley, you don't have to worry about finding it at 2 in the morning. And so that's the what we call our dart gun. Thankfully now they're reasonably technically advanced. They're accurate. You can moderate the velocity. And so once we dart the animal, we give it about 5 or 10 minutes. Usually, like your deer, you're going to dart them. They're going to keep walking. They're going to eat some flowers, and then they're going to fall asleep on somebody's yard, right? And so you don't have to look for them. You just go. We get a stretcher, put the deer on the stretcher, put it in the back of a pickup truck. You bring it to whatever, facility, maintenance, building, or something. We'll look at that. But to this point, no different than whether there's community opposition or support, these projects, whether, if people don't want to have, somebody going in their yard at 2 in the morning and picking the deer up and putting it on a stretcher and taking it, that's a problem. We've never had problems with that, right? We always offer, we always advise, instead of, you're never going to get permission from everybody. We say if you don't want the deer management program retrieving deer from your property, contact Joey, and he'll put it on the list, and nobody will go on your property. But when you're doing non-lethal, people are like, that's fine. No, I've only been seen twice. I've handled over 2,000 deer in suburbia doing these sterilization projects. I've been seen twice with a deer in hand. And those are people at 2 in the morning, couldn't sleep, walking their dog. We're coming out of somebody's yard. They're looking at us crazy. I'm looking at them crazy, right? And you carry on. So from an impact perspective to the community, pretty minimal. And this is a normal setup. So we'll usually run 2 surgical tables. And so we have 2 vets working side by side. They're using the same electronics for doing the cautery work and so forth inside. And it takes us, with our vets, anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes from what we call cut to close. From when you make the incision to the ovaries are removed, you suture it back up, and then we release the animal back in the field. So we give it a reversal drug that helps it wake up faster. So once we bring them in the field, we'll have them on their feet no more than 5 minutes, probably 2 or 3 minutes, they're up and walking away. And so we always leave somebody with them. You make sure they're ambulatory, or at least what we call sternally recumbent. So at least they can sit upright, their respiration's normal, they're gonna recover fine. We don't like to startle them and get them going. So if they look like they're comfortable and resting, we always have pre-designated release sites. So we're not putting them along Tega K highway here. You find little nooks and crannies along the golf course that are quiet. There's no dogs around, there's no water to fall in, right? And that's where the deer selectively recover. So we published 3 years ago now on 6 case studies where we were sterilizing deer in communities, and we would always sterilize 90% or greater of the females in the community. As you could see, we would get up to over 50% of that population after 6 years in terms of population without killing a deer, right? There's always a few we call incidental mortalities, but as a whole, you can see an appreciable change, but you've got to get over 90% of the deer, right? So that you don't have that enough reproduction to balance out whatever's dying in your community, right? It's not hard math there. You don't see deer immigrate. That's not in their nature, right? So you can manage deer by whatever means you choose in Tega K, and you're not going to be killing deer from the county coming in every year. Doesn't happen. So that's a non-issue. We haven't had issues with just you work closely with the police department. Some communities, they have an officer that rides with us as you're darting. Sometimes they just have an officer on call. So if somebody says, hey, there's a suspicious vehicle with a flashlight out the window, they'll call me up and go, hey, are you over on, Cody Drive? Yeah, that's us. Okay, we're not going to send an officer out. So in terms of working within these types of communities with a lot of activity, we don't have conflicts. And then the handling of deer, we usually lose about 2 to 3% of the animals you capture. The challenge we have, so if you have dogs or cats, when you bring them to the vet for a procedure, even for a dental, they're going to take blood work, right? They're going to do an exam. And if there's any pre-existing conditions, they're going to take that into consideration, or they may tell you, hey, your dog's too old. This anesthesia could kill it. So we're not going to do the procedure. I can't do that with a deer. And I don't know how old the deer, I don't know if it has pre-existing conditions. So typically you see some of these failures because I don't know what that animal's risks are before I dart it. Just a reality of the game. It's expensive, right? We can be successful, right? But it's a lot of money. There's a lot of staff, right? And you have veterinarians, and you have techs, and you have biologists darting animals, right? It's a lot of labor. If we had 2 vets at the tables, we'd handle 20 to 30 deer a night. We'd sterilize in a community like this. It'd be easy, it's short, the drives are short, really efficient, the deer are approachable. But you have 6 people. So we try to work with local communities and local interested parties that can do support stuff. You can have people carry deer. You don't need my people carrying deer, right? If you have volunteers that could participate, we're always interested in trying to ensure that we can minimize costs, across the program. So in sum, with your fertility control options, thankfully we don't have a bunch of legal problems. Some communities have a lot of hunters, You probably have hunters here. But some of them are against this. They're like, we want to bow hunt in our community. Why do I have to buy leased land out in the county to hunt? I should be able to shoot deer in the community. Maybe you have that here. I don't know. Some communities we do. So here, not a lot of that. The timeline of impact, as I said, every deer I dart, not everyone, but the vast majority of the deer I dart are still alive when we're done. So you have to wait for them to die. So there's not this immediate reduction of population. You've got a cost factor, obviously. The deer behavior, are we concerned about this reproductive extension? Shouldn't create a big problem in your community. But some people feel as though, is that, this whole notion, right? Some people are really animal attached and they don't feel that that is proper to do, right? Who are we to take away that deer's reproductive rights? I've had those arguments, and we've had people stop a project because they thought it was inappropriate. Anyway, I'm not saying you have that here, but a consideration. And from a suitability perspective, you can't find a better space than what you have here to do this. You have roads, you have dumb deer. I mean, you'll be able to dart deer faster than we could possibly pick them up and bring them to do surgery. So whereas some people go, oh, we have a big park, it's 500 acres, can you sterilize the deer there? I'm like, are there any roads, right? How do I get to the deer, right? Are the deer used to someone walking to that park, or are they used to a car going through, or are they gonna run away? So those are real issues around what is suitable. And so as the spectrum goes, as it's harder to sharpshoot, which means more houses, more people, it's easier to do fertility control, right? So it's usually the trade-off just because of the environment in which the deer live. And I will guarantee the reason you have a lot of deer here, other than they've obviously reproduced over time, is people were feeding. When they started, that accelerates the deer acclimation to a community. It gets them more settled and comfortable, and then the more they integrate in your community, now they're in all these little yards, right? And they're not just sitting on the outskirts of your community where you have larger wooded areas. So next steps, y'all get the joy of now, instead of me talking to you and y'all listening, it's like y'all have to talk and figure out what's best for your community, right? That's on you, right? I could provide more information through Joey or other means, but I do not participate in that other than information. When are you trying to get this done? What's the permitting process, right? When, what's the deer, breeding season? When would you have to treat the animals based on the method that you're trying to use? How would it be compatible if you're doing a lethal project? All those things have to be considered. Your budget, right? No matter what you're doing, there's going to have to be, how does that fall in relative to the number of deer in your community? I would really like, as I said, I could speak to the folks doing the population monitoring in August and maybe get some additional data from them that'll help enlighten us on really in more depth what we're getting into in terms of number of animals to be handled. You have your own, from a legal perspective, like we run into places where there's lawsuits, right? No matter what y'all decide, somebody's suing you, it's crazy back and forth. So it doesn't feel like if it were gonna happen, it would have happened with the shooting, right? So now it's more, that's not as big a concern on your agenda. The carcass recovery data, again, I think Joey said it to me, but keep collecting those, right? Those are the indices you want to know on how your program's working. So don't stop that. And then regardless of what you move forward with, you've already gone through step one with the state. So now it's, what are you going to do? It feels as though Charles Ruth is a very bright man. And he's been around enough where he's seen what we call the non-traditional management and recognizes there's some value. So I think the state is a good ally, right? And will help work with you on moving forward with solving your problem if you choose to do so. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. And
Ma'am, it's just time for council questions for right now. If you would just save your questions for public comments, please.
So I have a question. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. DeNicola. Appreciate your time and energy and coming on down here. I told you another question earlier, but I talked about another one. You mentioned the shooting on private land and then public land. What are your best practices of getting like public acceptance in regards to riding around the community and darting deer for potential fertility control agents or sterilization within their community or their neighborhoods?
Okay, so what, you're talking strictly non-lethal?
Yes.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
from a non-lethal perspective, we work with the chief, we come up with a field strategy that obviously he's got to be comfortable with and his staff. But you're just in a vehicle with a dart gun and you just, that's what we do. You're not going to dart with somebody's picture window behind the deer, but there's plenty of little spots here in between yards and little embankments. And so the community would have to collectively, again, we usually offer them the opportunity to opt out of going on their property, but you're darting from the public road. And then we're working under the, usually how either with animal control or law enforcement, that you're engaging these animals with a dart rifle, and then you have the police department's authority or animal control's authority to retrieve that deer. Right? That's usually how it's structured within the community. So if there was a deer with a broken leg to get hit by a car, typically law enforcement has that authority, use the discretion to enter private property to address it, right? So it's under the same context. So again, if the community doesn't want people collecting darted deer in their yard, then you don't do darting and fertility control, right? So it's no different than if there's constraints on sharpshooting that prohibit the method from being successful, then you don't do it, right? So from my perspective, the chief and whoever else is involved, Joey, council, says, hey, this is what you can and can't do. Then I look at it and go, I'm going home. Or that's reasonable, but this is how it's going to impact operations. You're going to have 30% less efficiency, so expect more cost, right? There's always a trade-off. The more burden you place on any operation, construction or otherwise, you're going to impact cost. So it's really, we would give you the spectrum of what's ideal, and then you tell me what's realistic within your community, and then you have that discussion. And for me, as with any method I look at, if you put excessive constraints on it, it gets to the point where it's just not going to be successful. And for me, I'm not going to dart one deer in your community unless there's a plan and an agreement that this could potentially be effective, right, and be successful for you, right? I have no interest. My daughter lives in South Carolina. I have no interest to come down here and dart a deer, right, or kill a deer, right? I either have to solve your problem and work with you in a meaningful way to do that. I have no interest, right? I've been doing this way too long. And so I'll know exactly, I've seen every possible thing you can imagine and how it would impact my ability to be successful in the field. And I'll tell you pretty quickly, what's a showstopper on me being able to actually provide a service that gives you the value for your money.
Doctor, would you ever support a program that didn't involve ear tagging?
You can't say you wouldn't support it, right? It's my job is to afford you the pros and cons, whether that's economical, logistical, long-term repercussions of actions, right? So I can advise you on what's better than another option, but it's really up to you, right? And again, you can integrate methods, right? You can have parallel methods. You can do sterilization, you can do vaccination. But again, there's challenges. As I mentioned, if you're darting some deer with a vaccine that doesn't need to be with ear tags, it's kind of not so nice to the deer to then dart it or shoot it after, because it's already been effectively treated. So unless you're doing that one-dimensionally, and then the other challenge is, again, the multiple shooting of the animal, the education of the animal, it would be my least suggested option. I'm not saying you wouldn't do it, but it would not be advised.
So you would recommend that we would tag each deer that we touch?
In order to have the ability to move forward with a long-term comprehensive plan, that would be advisable.
Okay, just a few more. How far does the tracking device pick up?
In this terrain, you'll get at least it depends. If it's over a steep ridge, maybe a quarter mile, but blind of sight, it'll go a mile. So the easiest thing in this area, get on all your houses are on high roads, right? Get on a high road, get your telemetry out, and you'll pick up a signal, which gives you a vector. And then the beautiful thing now with technology, I can look on my phone and go, oh, It's right over there. Back in the day, you had to wander through woods for a half an hour to find it.
So how long would that tracker last?
They run for, continuously run for between 24 and 36 hours, depending on
So
temperature.
would that give us enough time to track the movements of those deer to where we could identify migratory patterns, to identify where they go?
That would be another approach, right? We would put a collaring mechanism on. And so we can think about that, right? There's two different types of tracking collars. There's VHF collars, which give a consistent signal, but you have to manually go out there and find it, right? And then so somebody's got to get paid to follow the stupid deer around, right? And then they have GPS collars, right? And those collect those locations at whatever frequency you want, and then you can get them right from the satellite at your computer. You can see where that deer is standing right now. Those cost $2,800 each. So you got to have a lot of interest and want to know where the deer are. And I can tell you right now, deer in this community will have very small home ranges, right? They're not moving far. The deer that are in Mrs. Smith's neighborhood are always in Mrs. Smith's neighborhood. Maybe they go to Mr. Jones' neighborhood, but it's pretty predictable. And they'll have home ranges between the females, probably between 50 and 75 acres, very small.
Okay. Last one for me, guys. If you had staff to help you, say our city staff would be willing to help you, how many deer could you process an hour?
An hour?
If you had
with
100
volunteer
people hauling deer to you, how many deer could you get done an hour?
My vet can probably turn a deer over every 30 minutes. So you get 4 an hour.
So if you had 10 vets here,
Logistically, that gets really ugly.
we're good at logistics.
You should be able to turn a deer every 30 minutes with a vet that's skilled at performing this procedure. And we can train, I mean, for us, we've trained almost 20 different vets around the country. So you can train people. Usually the best surgeons are those that do spay-neuter clinics because they're up to speed. A lot of vets just sit there and shovel paperwork and give injections to cats and dogs. So I wouldn't let them work on a cadaver, never mind a living animal. So you really have to find people that have that skill set. The challenge with these programs, and I heard loud and clear to the chief, it's like we work at night. We'll start here with non-lethal. We like to start probably right around dark, and we work to sunrise. And so our volunteers or staff available to work night shifts. So the problem with volunteers is they usually have day jobs. So you work till 6 in the morning, you're not going to make the day job. And then if you only make 4 hours, and then by the time I teach you what we're doing. So we have some communities where we have die-hard volunteers, and they're amazing, right? So it's not saying it's not feasible. It's just you have to pose that reality. But we're happy. I'm happy to come down with, train people to dart. I could train law enforcement to dart. I could train volunteers to dart. We can structure it any way you want where there's long-term internal viability. I'm good with whatever. I just want to see, whatever you desire as an outcome, it's my job to meet that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more. Anybody else?
Yes. So came across a really interesting article from the National Park Service on Fire Island. And very, very beneficial information that really mirrors a lot of what we're experiencing. Their goals and their strategy was probably a little bit more advanced than ours. I think they've probably been down the road a little bit longer than we have. Thinking about that, their goal was to get to about 25 deer per square mile. We were told by Dr. Ruth that's probably about a healthy number of deer per square mile in the wild. We might be able to tolerate a little more than that here. So let's say that number is 30. What is there a suggestion you have for us to reduce the population we have and then maintain it and do that in quicker than 10 years? Because our natural resources are just getting destroyed from the number of deer that we have. So how do we fix that and restore the natural resources more quickly?
You'd have to integrate a lethal, non-lethal combination, right? And with that timeline, with that objective, you'd have to accelerate mortality, right? There's no two ways about it. My guess is, because you don't have a lot of deer vehicle collisions, you're getting deer, whatever, stuck on fences or whatever mishaps are occurring. When I work with Humane Society of the United States on a federal facility, and they were using a PZP vaccine, and they were finding deer, and they ended up injecting these females 3, 4, 5 times. They were preventing reproduction. These deer were living to well over 20 years.
Right, yeah.
They
I've
don't
seen
die,
that.
right? Because they don't have that reproductive. They had over 20% of their population was between 15 and 20 years old, because they don't have the stress associated with reproduction.
With reproduction.
right? And so these deer were just like, come on.
Or the stresses of the wild.
Yeah. And so we have another one of our. I call it my failure, even though it's a great project. It's been 8 years, and we've only seen a 40% reduction. In Cincinnati, great people, volunteers, nothing against them. Their deer don't die, right? They have little neighborhoods with low speed limits, and it's like they're always horrified when one of their deer die. And I'm like, you got to die faster, right? Because the parks aren't going to do. The park system there is what allowed them to do this instead of a bow hunt. And it's like they want to see results, right? And we have every deer sterilized. A handful of deer come in each year. We sterilize them, and it's like till there's like no reproduction. But these deer just keep going. So in that vein, I would say in your community with low mortality rates, most of your DVCs, you'd have to have a combined method. And then you decide what that rate of decline needs to be, right, based on your interest, and then how you would mix methods. We're doing a joint project now with Wildlife Services in Ohio, where they're doing the sharpshooting in the community, and then in the more densely developed areas, we're sterilizing. So half the community is sharpshooting and sterilization, and the other half is just sharpshooting where there's bigger areas, bigger properties to shoot. And we'll have our third year is finished. We'll have our report written. But you'll see that obviously it's logical, right? Their culling is complementary and our sterilization is complementary, because we have over 80 deer sterilized in that community. And if they were all reproducing, everything they killed would be replaced. So it's this whole notion, no different than you all trying to get 180 deer culled. You have at least 600 deer here, right? So you kill 180, you're doing nothing. You're gonna have 180 fawns on the ground come June. So in terms of, really having to swallow that pill of what's it gonna take for you to actually see results, you can't just deny those and just think about, well, the state, which to me is absurd, right? That they're only going to give you 80, then they jump it to 160. It's absurd, right? I know Charles knows it's absurd, but that's the reality, the world you're working in. So knowing that, you're going to have some type of complementary method, or culling alone is never going to get you. Every year you're going to cull, and you're never going to see the gains that you're looking for.
Right.
But if you kill 160 versus 60, of course it's going to be much more beneficial and complementary to minimizing the number of fawns that are born into the landscape each spring. So again, I could make this complicated, or we can have this as pretty simple, right? And then it's just looking at what the relative cost factors are for how many deer you need to cull versus how many deer you need to sterilize, what those field methods might be, how lenient they are, how constraining they are, right? Those are realities, right? Obviously safety is paramount, but I can tell you I've killed over 20,000 deer, and I've never even had close to a mishap with a firearm in a lot of these densely developed areas. So it's what is realistic versus what is perceived. And only the community, as the chief said, when do you feel safe? So people have to, they're going to be safe. It's do they feel safe? And is the community leadership and the community willing to accept that this could be done safely, even if there's a perception that, oh my God, you're shooting a high-powered rifle and anyone could be out there. It's like, these are controlled operations.
Right.
So it's just making sure that it's, lenient enough where your program was successful from a
Effective,
safety
right.
perspective, but you're not doing anything killing 36 deer.
Yeah.
And it doesn't shed light on Wildlife Services. Just listening to the chief, there's no way you're going to be successful with those levels of constraint, right? And so you're going to need to really think about how much you can flex within your program, how much is your community comfortable with that flexion of activities. And if the community says no, whatever the chief says and whatever the chief's comfortable with is it, and we don't support him, reconsidering more lenient tactics, then you're really boxed in terms of what your lethal tools are. Then you may look at trap and euthanasia, right? Where you can capture those animals without any safety issue because there's no firearm, right? You euthanize those animals with a captive bolt device. So there's other ways to do it. It's just more stressful. If you take a drop net, it looks like a party tent, but it has a soccer net for a canopy, and you drop that on deer. You can imagine what's going to happen, right? There's panic, there's stress.
A lot of stress.
And so you have to decide, is that stress worth the need for your community to reduce the population, right? Those questions can only be answered by you and your community, right? Some of our communities are like, we want to kill them, but we can't because we can't discharge a firearm. So our hands are tied. No, we don't want to drop net deer and kill them. But other than that, we have to live with all these deer, right? And they're having hundreds of deer vehicle collisions a year. So there's all those elements that you have to decide, the humaneness, the social acceptability, the legality, right? The cost, right? What is considered safe or unsafe? You know, is it considered to allow you to go in a yard and pick up an immobilized deer, right? Only you can decide what fits your community and what you would consider acceptable, right? And we're happy to help you, but I have no say in what makes you guys work as a community entity.
Great content, Doctor. I really appreciate everything you put into this and all the years of your research, too. Thank you.
I'll jump. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Carmen. I didn't see you there.
Go ahead.
I just follow up to you. Just talked about the trapping in euthanasia. Do you ever tranquilize in euthanasia?
We do. I don't usually bring it up because most people find that a little more harder to digest than other methods.
So it just seemed instead of dropping a net on them,
yeah,
put them asleep and
it works. But then
you
you
know,
can't donate the meat. That's
Okay,
the
sure.
challenge.
Yeah.
So we have a community in New York that we started where there were such discharge restrictions that we couldn't do anything lethal. So we started sterilization. I sterilized almost every female in that community, same size as your community, a little over 2 square miles. Sterilized every female. And population's going down. The mayor there is not going down fast enough. Find a solution for me. So the state reduced the archery discharge distance. It was the same as firearms. It was crazy. There's no place we could work in the community. There's enough people opposed to the lethal, you couldn't get permission. So we started doing archery tackle removal, and killed 50-something deer the first year. That's a big jump. When you start at 200, you got 25%. There's no reproduction. It's going down fast. Then the state, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they were going to, and there was this law always is there, but they decided to enforce a law where you could not place bait within 300 feet of a road. You look at your community, find 300 feet from a road, it doesn't exist. Shut us down. So then the mayor said, I don't care. Can we capture and euthanize? So that's what we do. We drive around because their deer were just like yours, very tame from the road. It's hard for them to always learn, if you don't have to repeatedly do it, that car is your car, the bad guy car is my car, the bad guy car, right? Because they can't run from every car, they go crazy, right? So if you're strategic about it, we dart those deer, locate them, and we euthanize them. A veterinarian gives them a lethal injection, but unfortunately, they have to be disposed of.
Okay.
So that's the bigger downfall. But yes, if we drove, darted, and euthanized deer in this community, say you had 3 vehicles with a darter in it, and 1 vet that would dart and euthanize, shoot, you'd handle 40, 50 deer a night.
Wow.
Oh yeah, fast.
And it, is the price similar to the other operations? I mean, might as well ask.
I feel like he's buying a car, right? It's all, I try to do everything time and materials.
Yeah.
Right? And so if I have half the number of people, right, and I can get in, I don't have the surgery and all the rest of that time consumption, yeah, it probably cost, of course, there's diminishing returns, right? Up front, you're getting 40, 50 deer a night, and then as you start running out of deer, your effort per deer, the deer numbers go down, the effort per deer goes up.
And I'm assuming that's considered humane still?
Yeah.
Humane,
Yeah.
no different than a
Because
dog,
they're under
right?
full anesthesia,
Yeah.
they're not aware of what's going on.
Right.
And so then you'd probably be half of what a sterilization would be. And then, again, that animal's gone.
Yeah.
So it's half the cost, and it's not in the landscape.
Right. And then final question, different topic. Is this stuff you can do year round, or are there certain timeframes based on if the deer are pregnant or whatever, you know, I mean,
So for fertility control, your vaccines have to be administered at least a month ahead of the breeding season, right? Because the immune system has to get active enough to prevent it from getting pregnant. With sterilization, we don't like to do it before September because some females are still lactating. And so the incision sites next to the uterus, next to the udder, so we usually wait till mid-September, and you can do those procedures until mid-February pushes it, because then you're starting to get into late term, because they get pregnant in November, and they give birth in May and June, right? So as they get later in gestation, they're more pregnant, it's harder to do the surgery just because the fetus and all is so big. So we don't like to do that beyond early February, I'd say. So you've got from September through, say, early mid-February.
thank you. I'm done, I'm not gonna ask more questions, I just wanna say thank you, this has been fascinating. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, ma'am.
You had provided, I believe it was that you provided some charts of cost estimates for 3 different types of non-lethal. There's 2 that are immunocontraceptive, but I don't know which is which as far as cost. And then what you said was the first year on one, I'll just go through one of the slides. The first year, there would be 135 to 150 females that are treated for a total of 119,360. The second year, sorry, I have to go through these. Second year, it was going to be 113,372, and then the third year, it was going to be 123,053 for a total deer impact of 210 females. So adding that up all together, we're getting close to that $500,000 to $600,000. Is that right?
It'll come out like probably somewhere around 4-ish.
4, okay.
350 to 4, depending.
So how did you get to that number of 210 deer to be effective for what we're looking at long-term?
Okay, so that would have been one of the immunocontraceptive approaches. So I gave you one that is with a vaccine that works with 1 injection, right? And then it would need a boost the second year. And then the other one that's more expensive, I have to give a prime and then a boost the same year, and then I have to come back the next year and dart the same deer again. So you would have fewer deer treated with the 2 shots that year, because I have twice as much work to get the same treatment effect, right? And then what happens is, and these are, I could create a very elaborate model that would be meaningless, because it would just, at the end, whatever it is, garbage in, garbage out. But you're trying to make your best guess. So I figured, based on what I see here, number of deer, how many deer can I dart and capture and give a vaccine injection, right? So whatever it was, 100, rough range. But probably 10% of those aren't going to be effectively treated. So that is in part of my equation, where the number I capture versus effectively treat are 2 different things. Then the next year, I have to go treat those same deer again. So I'm not gaining any new females, but part of that cost, I would get some new females. These are just rough, guessing on what I would anticipate in the landscape. So instead of with surgery, I may not get as many the first year because you have extra time associated with it, with that rough. I tried to keep all 3 methods with the same rough cost each year. And what would your expected return be? And what that shows is, with sterilization, after 3 years, you're getting more deer sterilized.
275 versus 210.
Correct, for the same price. And then I never have to deal with those again. Those deer are never going to come back into reproductive condition for the rest of their life. So it was more an exercise to give you rough cost, but then also an appreciation of, it's the turtle versus the hare, right? The non-tagging, just darting without tagging, you come out of the gate fast, you're darting a bunch of deer, you're not finding them. But in the long run, you have to repeat that effort so many times, you already saved the money by putting the time in, catching it, and sterilizing it. And we published on that in that
Well,
respect.
I think that's what you were trying to say earlier, that if you're not actually tranquilizing, tagging, and then doing the hormone shot, then you never know which deer has been already treated. So you could be treating the same deer 5-6 times and leaving the untreated deer untreated without ever knowing.
Correct.
Okay. And then when you're trying to think what my next question was, I'll come back to it if anybody else has a question.
Just a quick question. Joey covered this a little bit. You are an absolute expert in regards to everything, sterilization, contraceptive, the whole thing. I get this question all the time in regards to the community. How come you can't just capture and relocate the deer? Can you just give a simple answer, and just so everyone can hear that from someone else?
Well, the two general reasons are disease transmission, right? You're moving deer from one location to another, and now that, there's more understanding of those risks, most state agencies won't even permit it. So when we talked about legal elements, you'll never get a permit. And then the other, well, there's three issues. Then who the heck wants your deer, right? I've been in a lot of places in South Carolina, and there's not too many places I go where you don't have a ton of deer, rural or urban, suburban. And then ultimately, again, this is a judgment call on humaneness, right? You're not killing that deer, but now you're either darting it or you're drop netting it, and then you're putting it in a trailer, you're driving it to a foreign area. All that deer knows its whole life is the 50 or 75, whatever it is, acres of Tega K from the day it was born. And now you're dropping it who knows where, right? Assuming you can have this destination, that's going to have new risks, whether that's bobcats or coyotes or hunters or, different vehicle patterns. And so most of the research has shown that a vast majority of those deer end up dead anyway by the end of a year. So you subject them to all this stress, right? And then they end up dead anyway. So you're just as well euthanize them where they are. There's places in Texas that do that because they don't want their hands dirty having the deer die within their city limits. So they capture the deer, they bring them to a processor, and then they kill them there. Beyond me, but the state permits it, and that's what they do. So again, I'm not passing judgment, but it seems a little crazy.
Thank you.
Back to my question real quick. So there's of the two types of vaccines, not vaccines, but the hormone treatment. One requires more than 2 boosters, and the other one requires 2. Is that for the lifetime of the deer, or because an average deer here is about 10 years, is what I'm gathering. So do you never have to do a hormone treatment for those deer again?
The best data we have, if you have 3 treatments with either the PZP-22, they call it, which is not registered here, and that comes a whole nother conversation on trying to have a valid research project because you need a separate authorization from EPA to do the trial, right? So it becomes a research trial. That and Gonacon, our best understanding of Gonacon is if they get 3 injections, they're pretty much done. But you still have 10% of them reproducing. So even after that effort of 3 handlings or 3 injections, you still have 10% of those animals reproducing. So
Go back a couple years later too, right?
we know typically with those treatments, the Gonacon or the PZP-22 with a single shot, and it's, the Zonistat takes a prime and a boost to be effective. The single shot will work with 1 injection based on the formulation, but they make it sound like you're one and done, but you're one and done now. Next year you lose, you're down to 50% effectiveness, so you have to boost it, and then that will start to diminish, just like with the COVID vaccines, right? You see you have to get boosters and so forth. So same concept. And so by year 3, by the 3rd treatment, typically those elevated titers will persist for their life. But we don't know. Like some of those, if they last another 10 years, we don't have those data on how it would work. But in general, a vast majority of those animals with 3 injections or with Zonistat 4 injections, you would almost be sterile, 90% of them.
If we were looking at non-lethal option only, based on whatever our total numbers are, because you're saying that they're less than what we think they are, what percentage would actually have to be treated in order for that to be effective?
With your, again, I'll have to look at the data. I'd like to get a better population estimate. I'd like to know what the mortality rates are, right? You know, are there 10% of the animals dying, 20% of the animals dying? Now, you don't know what the numbers are, right? You know, we know how many are dying that you're picking up, and you're presuming that you're finding most of them, right? Because there's not many nooks or crannies here where kids aren't playing or people aren't walking or dogs aren't finding carcasses, right? So you're finding a lot of them, but we don't know what it is relative. Is it 1,000 deer? Is it 600 deer, right? So we don't know the percentage. So given that, you don't know, if you don't know the mortality rates, you can't compare it to the what percentage you need to treat. But in general, in a community like this, you probably have to have at least 80% of the females treated to start to see a decline. And if you want to see a measurable decline, like not just 1 or 2% a year, you know, you're going to have to jump to 90% or more to really see an appreciable decline in your without added mortality, without, you know, sharpshooting or chopping euthanasia.
I read a lot of your Ann Arbor project because you did it over a 4-year period, and it seemed like there was a lot of similarities from start to finish about the population and the difficulty in doing any one thing effectively. So do you, in your experience, I think you said that you advocate a multi-prong approach. Can you clarify what that means for us?
So the options we just discussed, right? Could be dart and euthanize. Could be capture and, you know, drop net and euthanize. Could be sharpshooting, right? Could be any of the fertility control options, right? So, you know, but in general, you're going to want to mix a lethal, have additive lethal in order to see a near-term population decline, right? Measurable decline. So you still want to keep that on the table, but as on a larger scale, Ann Arbor is obviously much bigger. We tried to sharpshoot where it was, you know, easier and in the larger areas, less conflict. And then as we got in the dense neighborhoods, you know, we used sterilization. And we're here, it'd be kind of overlapping, but you look at your community from Google, you have several of these peninsulas, right, where there's no golf course, right? I don't know if you're ever going to be able to kill them unless you're darting and euthanizing or drop netting them. You're not going to sharpshoot them there because those deer aren't coming to the golf course. Some of these deer don't even know there's a golf course, right? They're not traveling that far. So
Right.
you have to
They're
be
in
able
our
to.
yards.
We say you could bring the deer, you could bring deer to bait, but you still have to get to the deer, right? You just can't put some magical pile of corn right in the middle of a Tega K and sit over it and shoot deer, and they all just keep piling in.
Not
But
gonna
in
happen.
your experience, these options are not mutually exclusive.
Oh, not at all. No, they're only mutually exclusive from a social perspective.
Okay.
That's it. From a
And you had-
technical perspective, not.
You had also mentioned that there's, and I don't want to misquote you, but you mentioned that there is no deer immigration. Can you explain what you meant by that?
It's never
Ian?
no, but
Okay.
it's usually minimal,
Okay.
right? So each spring, the female gives birth, right? And her fawns from last year, she says, get out of Dodge, right? I've got a new fawn, I need space to bond, and so they go away. The female fawns come back. By the end of the summer, the female's not lactating, her lactation's diminishing, her family comes back together. That's where you see these social groups here. In the spring, they're by themselves, right? All the females that have given birth are solo. The male fawns leave, right? That's how they avoid inbreeding. So you'll have male fawns that are going 3, 4, 20 miles from here, and then you may have some find their way into Tega K. So you're going to have some, and occasionally you'll get some females that may immigrate, but these are small percentages. They are not your concern from a population management perspective. They're very, very minor. Like on Staten Island, now that we have almost every male deer on that island tagged and sterilized, we can now measure how many are, they all came from New Jersey, right? They all came from the West. All the junk comes from New Jersey. But I'm sorry, most of y'all are probably from up north, but as am I. But now we can literally count
like this guy.
that about 10 to 15 deer come in. So when I'm thinking about now, we're down from like 2,500 deer down to 1,200 deer. When I'm thinking about 15 deer, I'm going to catch them and sterilize them, but it's not my bigger concern. It's too small. So it's really not something that there's not, like people have this impression there's some osmotic behavior where if you remove all the deer from Tega K, all the deer from outside are going to come in. The deer on the outside don't even know you exist. So there's no reason, they'll never even know that, hey, there's empty golf courses with a lot of food. No clue. Right? So you have to put your mind in a deer. That's not how it's not like a coyote or animals have much broader home ranges that are going to find these voids and fill them. Deer don't, eventually they will. A couple deer come in, they reproduce, right? But don't even concern yourself with that as an issue.
Okay, thank you. That's all that I have.
Okay.
I have one last question. Are we paying you by the hour?
Right now, it's done. Well, it's after 9. It's like quadruple time.
I'm just kidding. You've been great. I really appreciate it. Thank
Anything
you.
y'all
Very
need, like to
informative.
Joey, I mean, just so you know, and I'm not just saying this because Joey's sitting there, this guy's unbelievable, right? He's sharp, he's on cue, he's excellent at gathering information, compiling it, so I don't say it because I've worked in dozens and dozens and dozens of communities, and it's like, usually you're dealing with people like, it's like pushing a rope, right? Nothing gets done. Like, by the time I send the text, he's already sent me a text back. I'm like, oh, geez, this guy's driving me crazy. But in terms of a resource to gather information, I can continue to work through him. You're more than welcome to email me directly. But if it's easier for you to consolidate those inquiries, send them through Joey. I can either send you literature or give you direct responses, give you insights on pros and cons of different elements of as you move forward. Right? I'm happy to continue. I'm done. I'm trying to retire. Right? I'm too old to chase deer around neighborhoods all night. Right?
Wait a couple years.
Yeah, that's what everyone keeps telling me. I'm like, I can't do it anymore. But I like to see people succeed, right? If people are committed to doing it and they need that guidance to be successful, I feel obligated as a professional. It sounds corny, but that's what I've done from day one, right? So if we can help you, find those solutions, work with you to figure out what's realistic, in order to meet your goals, it's good. And if I'll always come back to South Carolina because my daughter's here, but, if I don't come here, there's no sweat off my back, right? But again, I watch so many communities struggle, over 30 years, I feel their pain. You're not experts, you're trying to figure out how to manage deer and you hope it's simple. And of course, now not so simple. So if we can simplify that, or y'all are going to leave, we're going to lay in bed tonight, think about this, and you're all going to get back together tomorrow, and you're going to go, just leave the deer, man. We don't feel like dealing with it, right? Those are your choices, right? Right? Or your community decides, all this aggravation and expense, we'll just live with our deer, right? Some communities do that. I have community, and not to belabor it, but I did a sterilization project in Fairfield County, Virginia, and I went in there, and everywhere I've gone, they're like this. There's 1 million deer, right? I go in, they have a deer problem. They were going to bow hunt. So these animal welfare folks brought me in, said, can you look, see how many deer are out here, something we can do? I drove around that community the first night. Perfect night. No wind. I'm driving the golf course, right? All the places you expect to see deer. I counted 2 deer driving for 6 hours in a 6 square mile area. I'm like, where can these things be, right? I'm like, maybe the weather was off, the moon, I don't know. I do it the next night. I count 5 deer. I'm like, and these people have a deer problem in their mind, right? So it's all relative, right? In terms of we did a sterilization project there. We captured every deer. Like every deer in there was, the first year, I think we estimated like 30-something females in 6 square miles. And you have a deer problem. So you guys have to decide what fits for you, whether it's ecological, whether it's landscape, whether it's public safety, right? That's not my purview, to voice opinion on. Just methodologies, techniques, considerations from a humanist perspective. I mean, I've seen animals go through a lot. I've just tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of deer I've handled in my own hands. And so I've seen so many different scenarios and outcomes. So all I can do is guide you for your own conscience on what you consider acceptable, right? And that may be different from the 5 of you sitting there and from your community. So you all have to collectively come together And it's not going to be perfect, right? You're going to have people that are on both ends of the spectrum, but you'll find a sweet spot. And again, that sweet spot may be, the heck with it, save the money and, put a new, get new library books or something. I don't know, right? Those are the other decisions y'all have to work on. So anyway, glad to keep working with Joey and handle any questions that surface.
Thank you, Dr. Pretty. It's
Warren
time.
Cleveland.
Okay. Hang on one second, Charlie. Okay, we're going to take about a 2-minute break and come back. So, do I have a motion to
I'd like to
Take a
make a
break?
motion to take a short 10-minute break.
Second.
got a motion and a second? All in
Okay,
favor?
aye.
2 minutes.
All right.
2 minutes.
We are in recess for a moment. Okay. Welcome back. I need an emotion to,
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to come back from break.
Second.
got a first and a second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, we got it. Even if we didn't have to cover, we got it covered. There we go. Okay. Let me get this computer started back up here.
Very patient planning commission.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, appreciate you. Okay, and with that, we are going to cover a public hearing with the Planning Commission. I will turn it over to you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of council, we are here for a joint public hearing for the amendment to the zoning code ordinance 77 as it relates to fencing requirements, Article 13. We have 3 people that have signed up for public comments. We will go in order. Ms. Ginger, you are first. If you could approach the microphone, give your name and address, and you will have 3 minutes for public comments for this public hearing. Thank you, ma'am.
Actually, I'm Ginger Thomason, and my daughter, who lives here on 713 Still Oak Trail in the Windhaven community by Lennar. I'm speaking on her behalf. She had to leave. She had she's a CNA, and she had a nighttime shift to fill. But anyway, just very quickly, I was here for the Planning Commission meeting and talked at that time, and several people did. And I think the Planning Commission was leaning toward making a recommendation that the fence that she has currently in her yard will be able to remain. She's in a townhome, and so she had lived there for a year with that fence, and then one day there was a sign on the door that said that the fence had to, within a couple of weeks, be down, replaced, or the city would take it down, at her cost. My husband and I bought that house for her. She's a disabled person who works part-time, is able to work part-time, has SSDI. She also has an ADA-approved dog who has all the required papers from the psychiatrist and everyone else, that we made certain with that community that before we bought the townhome for her, we can have a fence. Yes, yes, absolutely, you can have a fence for your dog, even though you're in a townhome on an end unit. And these townhomes have, the usual little 12-foot privacy, solid, white plastic, fencing that divides the townhomes. There's 4 units. Each one has about 12 feet going out between the units. So what the HOA said finally to do was they came out and actually placed the markers in the lot where they wanted the fence to go, and told us that it needed to be exactly the same fence as was already, the privacy fence that was already there. So we made sure the materials matched up. We took the fence to the lines where the HOA said to go to. They said to go back to the property line, so we did all that according. Got a contractor from Lowe's who installed that. They did not do due diligence. They did not seek the approval of the city of Tega, and they knew nothing apparently about the 60% opacity rule for fencing within the city of Tega. So then someone, like I said, a year later, must have noticed her fence, and then the city put the notice on her door. So my daughter, who tends to overreact to a lot of things anyway, completely lost it and panicked and went into a bad place. I assured her, we were going to work on this thing. So we've been working on it ever since then. I thought that maybe we were the only ones affected. That same fencing put up in the meantime. So it didn't affect just my daughter, but about 12 homes, townhomes. And I guess none of their contractors checked with the city of Tega either. But at any rate, we've been working diligently to try to resolve this. And my husband and I were down to the point of having purchased materials from Lowe's so that we would take it down and do the opacity requirements, and we'd have to come down to 5 foot, which would look odd because the privacy fence is 6 foot. Yes, and my 3 minutes is up.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay, very good. Thank you for I just hope that I hope the planning commission said that the fence could stay, and I just pray and hope that that's the way it's going to turn out. Thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ginger.
And, so anyway, my daughter will not be speaking.
I'm assuming she is
on
Tracy?
this. Tracy Beatty.
Okay.
She's a resident there.
Thank you, ma'am. Next up on the list, we have Andrew Morgan. Name and address, please.
Yes. Hi there. Andrew Morgan. I live on Lake Forest Drive. You got a lovely shot of my house earlier when the chief showed the 10th hole. I'm just past the 10th green there, so we're the white brick house up on the ledge there. So I heard a lot of comments about the fences. Wanted to just encourage you all to think a little bit more about being more restrictive than more broad in your adjustment. So, I, for one, I love TK. I love the openness of it, love the sense of community. That's why we're here. My wife's college roommate, her family live a mile down the road, yada, yada. We love it. I think making a broader change saying that you're going to allow fences on any townhome not only kind of starts to throw in all those other parts of the neighborhood. We say, I don't want to see privacy fences on the beach club or on the 18th fairway. And so for me, I'd say be more kind of thoughtful about, are you just trying to get around some issues we had with developers and making a smaller exception? Or you're going to do something that may have some broad sweeping down the road effect. And so for me, I would strongly recommend not making a broad sweeping change, not allowing all townhomes, but maybe either grandfathering in or being very specific around what developments and what neighborhoods you're going to allow for the specific fences, just so we don't lose some of that character, some of that sense of openness that kind of cuts across all of TK. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. That is all the names we have that have signed up for public comments. I will ask and open the floor if anybody would like to make comments about this item only. Go ahead.
Y'all know I can be fast.
Name and address, please.
Andrea Korth, and I live at 1817 Grove Park Lane. I am in the Windhaven, Lenora Windhaven at the front. Thank you for seeing me again. Sorry I forgot to sign my name on the list. I was a little late today. Work ran a little late. So I just wanted to share my support and the support of my neighbors that were not able to join us today to amend the fencing ordinance to make an exception for townhomes. As you may know, as Ginger so eloquently explained already, we've had several homes in the Windhaven community receive approval from our HOA for privacy fences. We weren't aware that this was not allowed by the city fence ordinance. So we feel a change in this ordinance aligns with the changes that we see in the type of housing as the city grows and allows us, those of us that share a wall with our neighbors, a little bit of privacy. Just kind of going on what my neighbor here has said, the way that Windhaven is built out and some of the other townhomes are built out in the city, just from me driving around, I don't feel that there would be an issue for the privacy fences to block any views. Most of the townhomes are in very specific spots. The only place that really we could build out was forward. Again, we don't have the tree coverage up at the front of the community like we do in the back of the community. It's really the way that we're built out, especially in Windhaven, is we are on very hilly areas. So you're built out, you've got your townhomes, and then you've got them subcentered underneath. So you can really see across. There's really not, the privacy fences really are not blocking any view. And when I look at the townhomes in other areas of the community, it's built very similarly. So I don't think that that would be an issue going forward for the townhomes. So the last thing I'll say here in my 1 minute left, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Nick Amico for reaching out to me when I posted something on our TK bulletin board. I had no idea this was something we could even ask the city council to look at. Again, really facilitating that communication, that open communication that we like to see in this community. I also wanted to thank Nick Cawthon over here for answering our questions, our many, many questions. And the questions of our neighbors. He was very patient in answering all of our issues. And then lastly, I wanted to thank you all, the City Council, for being open to hearing our concerns and taking action to remedy the issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrea. Anyone else got one more? Oh, no, we're not on that topic. No. Only about the fencing regulation changes and the recommendation for that. Seeing no other comments, Mr. Mayor, members of council, we will turn the meeting back over to you, and we will go next door and have a quick planning commission meeting, and then come back and talk to you for item number 7A.
Thank you, Chairman Ross.
Thank you.
And again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying over time tonight. We really appreciate it. Need some more? Here. You want to take the bowl with you? You want to take it with you. Just take the whole thing. There you go.
There you go.
My wife will thank you. Yeah. Okay, and with that, we will cover public comments. As always, please state your name and your address when you come to the podium. First, we have Linda Diehart. Linda Diehart going once, twice, okay. Frank Hart. I think Frank left too. Philip Snelling. Okay. Heather Jones.
Good evening. My name is Heather Jones, 2109 Bonneville Way. I am not here to talk about the deer. So I had 3 little points I wanted to ask about tonight, just to get these questions out for consideration. I know this isn't a question and answer. My first was to inquire about the formation of the public art jury. A couple months ago, when the city installed its first public art piece over at the roundabout, I had brought up that there was a 2020 resolution, I believe, not an ordinance, a resolution, that specifically outlined having a citizen-led public art jury that could be in place for reviewing assisting and basically looking at public art pieces and helping with that process. And right now we're currently doing committee applications. I know that ends here very soon at the end of February. I appreciate all the press that's been going out about that, letting citizens know to please apply for public committees like the Planning Commission and other committees. Those are a great way to help. But I would encourage council to look into adding the art jury. I know that Matchboard can be used year-round, so even though that selection process is going to close, I would really appreciate seeing us get ahead of the ball, as it were, so that the next time there is a consideration for public art, we already have a committee in place that can help with that process. Maybe they can start preemptively doing a review and helping out and taking some of that workload, so that it's a more transparent process for the next time around. The second one was just a quick question of if there had been any updates about the Parks and Rec survey from a year ago, because I had heard about it. There was an ad hoc committee that was formed. We haven't had any updates on that in a while, so I was just curious if we had any updates on the results and compilation and data of that. And that was it for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Bert, Broadway?
My name is Bert Broadway. I live on 27058 Catamaran Drive. My wife, Gail, and I have been proud residents of TK for 41 years. But over the last 3 months, we have been worried about the deer. We have been disappointed with this group here for promoting the killing and the culling of the deer. And I don't understand exactly why we can't look at the PZP after transparency was a big thing. And I think the deputy director today gave us a website we go to, and I was looking at it here while I was studying your figures. It looks to me like roughly we spent $1,189 per deer. For the 36 deer, it's $42,850. When we said it'd be $94,000 to kill 150 deer. It's a big difference there. That was one of the questions I have. So if we multiply the 189 by 150, it's $178,000 if they had killed 150 deer. Is that right? That's what it appears to be. If that's the case, then PZP would probably work for us here. We wouldn't have to kill the deer. We could just take and give them their shots. Now, being a resident here, I've dealt with Charlie and his group along a lot of times, and we have a good working relationship. Our community was worried whenever they started the killing. There was so much angst and anxiety in our group. You can't believe all the stuff that's been going around. But having transparency, if y'all had published the day that you killed the deer, if we would have known how many deer was being killed, I think you could have took a lot of worry off of everybody. But what happened is that we have to come to this meeting to find out that we have a website now that we go to and look at. This is probably one of the best things that I could tell you, that for everybody in TK, having a website where you can go and you can look and see and check. I think you have to have that for the transparency for everybody in the community, not just the ones that don't want the deer, but the ones that do want the deer. So it's a 50-50. I know that we had the survey out there. I didn't get a survey that said if you wanted me to kill the deer, I'd have said no. I'm a hunter. I've killed a lot of deer in my life, but I'm not a killer to go out and slaughter deer just because they're on the property. I had azaleas that's higher than my head, 25 years, and they're gone now. So, you know what? I cannot say that we can't feed these deer. I think the city ought to put together a plan to put food somewhere so the deer will have something to eat so they can stay out of everybody's yard. A bag of corn is a heck of a lot cheaper than killing them at $1,089. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Andrew Marine.
You heard the comments about the fences. Just briefly wanted to encourage you all to kind of look at the information that was talked about from a deer standpoint. I'm all for making the right choices to set some good goals for us. Happy to have people do whatever they need to do on our property if we need to sign a waiver or not. At the end of the day, I would say make the most cost-effective decision. I'd like to see us put some, more emphasis on other things in TK than deer. So deer are important. We need to figure that out. But I know one of the things my father-in-law couldn't mention, there are definitely some spots where we're seeing sidewalk cracks and gaps and separation. Some of it's tree roots, some of it's just the age of sidewalks. We've got parts of TK that don't have sidewalks. So there are probably some other infrastructure areas. One of his neighbors actually fell. Thankfully wasn't seriously injured. But just there are probably some areas where I'd like to see us, whatever we can do to look at fixing and repairing or adding maybe some more sidewalks to make it a little bit easier to get around some of TK. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. I can only assume that Kathy. Oh, Kathy, I thought it was you. Okay. Okay.
Well, I'm not a speaker, and my name is Kathy Olafson. Kathy Olafson Smith. I live on Samar Court, 16007. And this isn't really much to say, but it's just a few points, and some of it was notes that I was taking earlier. So these are just really some of my thoughts. I thought we spent $94,000 to cull 36 deer. That's already been brought up. So I thought maybe we could do a better planning. And to do that, maybe we could communicate better. Someone else also mentioned that. I thought text messages. The text messages that you sent out about the culling went to everybody, as far as I know, that lives in the city, and it was very effective. So if we could have text messages about city council meetings or maybe what was going to be covered, that's kind of a fast, inexpensive way to communicate. And another thought was about coordinating the wildlife management with urban development. Because our speaker earlier briefly mentioned deer immigration. And it didn't seem to be a problem, but we have a lot of development going on here. Don't we have 900 homes being planned? That is going to cause deer immigration or migration. So if we only address the deer population that we have now, it's not really going to solve future development. So maybe if wildlife management or preservation, which could be broader than deer, could coordinate with urban development, and this would probably be the place to do it, we might, and communicate a little better, probably would reduce frustration and maybe get some better results. So that was all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Brian Howell.
How you doing? Brian Howell, 2014 Marquesas Avenue. I just wanted to bring up real quick about the agreement that the city made with Charlotte Independence on the soccer program for our youth. So citing here on a previous council meeting, they agreed to, if approved, Independence has agreed to take over our recreational soccer program and run it the way that we have been running it, and pay on an escalating scale over the next 5 years. So that agreement came out to, I think, 1.063 million over 5 years. So I get why TKK has decided to do it. It helps generate the revenue that we need for paying off the park. So I'm not against that. But the problem is they have not they've not done what they agreed to do, which was keep everything the same. Their jerseys have no numbers on them. They overpopulate the teams. And then, so I got a notice today that my kids are not going to have a coach. And they have too many kids on the team. So I don't know if they're going to spread our kids out into other teams. And then last year we had our kids only got to play 6 to 7 minutes per game. So I think that they're just kind of they're not doing what they agreed to do, and I think that we need some oversight from TGK on it, because they're just not following up with what they agreed to do from the get-go. So I'm wondering if the city has any influence on that, and if they can do anything about ensuring that they're doing what they agreed to do. It's impacting our kids, and we're not getting the play time. And I don't even know if we don't get a coach, do our kids still play? Do they refund us? We have to go to another program. So, anyways, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Laurel Bougie. Did I mess that up again?
No, you
Okay.
actually already always get it right, which I'm impressed.
Okay, good.
Rapidly declining brain cells right now, but thank you so much for all of the great information about the deer. I'm actually here. The Planning Commission is probably getting tired of hearing it, as are you. Hopefully this will change tonight. Marina Overlay District, Laurel Bougie 26007 Morningside Drive. We still are looking for agreement from City Council to direct the Planning Commission to look into the Marina Overlay in its entirety. So there was definitely some confusion and misalignment, I think, at the last Planning Commission meeting, whether, I'm not sure how that happened, but we did not look at it within its entirety. So the red lines as it stands for the hotel is still there. I know it's going to second reading tonight. The rest of the Marina Overlay did not get looked at in the last Planning Commission meeting. So I'm here again to beg that we look at commercial development in its entirety, including the 300-person yacht club, the restaurants, all of the commercial development, because as a resident that lives directly across from the marina, we don't want the sounds, we don't want the sights, we don't want the smells, and we definitely don't want the noise. So that wraps up my comments, and I am also speaking on behalf of my neighbor, Paige Howarth, at 26006 Morningside Drive, and she has written down a statement that I'm going to read for her. While we are so appreciative that Council has listened to the concerns of so many regarding the allowance of a hotel within the Marina Overlay District, we remain concerned. The concern is not just about a hotel. We are concerned about any commercial development that would become a nuisance for homeowners and change the character of this residential area. We therefore ask that Council do the appropriate due diligence to protect residents and character of the area, starting with asking the Planning Commission for a total overview of the Marina Overlay Zoning District to make sure the zoning allowances actually align with being in a residential area and near the water. Any future commercial development in this area requires Council to use great discernment considering the proximity to residential homes and how sound travels and amplifies on water. Again, we ask Council to do the appropriate due diligence and send the entire zoning code back to planning for a thorough recommendation and review. And that's what we hope gets executed on tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you. With that will end our public comments. Well, you got to sign up first. Does anybody have any problem with letting Mr. Gregson get up to speak? Okay.
I just I was excited to see the people from the Catawba, Stephen Gregson, 16084 Heron Run Drive. But I was excited to see the Catawba people here, Indian Nation, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say people, I guess, is that correct? But just for how they were so thankful to get venison. I mean, that was kind of cool that they were so appreciative of it. So that has gone to a lot of good. Also, Joey knocked it out of the park tonight. I mean, this guy impresses me, which doesn't take much to impress me. I hate to say that, Joey, but I was really, the attention to detail and just to put the facts out there for you all to look at, to be able to make an educated decision, seeing it from all sides, not only at the front, the back, but the inside and out. And I was just really appreciative of that. I'm also extremely appreciative of Dr. Tony. I've had the pleasure of talking to him a couple times. The guy's hilarious, but the guy's genius too, but he can orate at the same time, and he has very logical thoughts that I think he really gave you all something to think about with that. I do want to just add a couple things, is that I know that a lot where people were disappointed in the low numbers in the culling the first time because of our population. Two things I feel that Dr. Tony brought up that's pretty clear, that there is a hybrid out there, and it does involve multiple protocols in that. And because of that, we don't see much data out there other than Ann Arbor had one and a couple others. And the reason is most of the researchers are paying for that product, that contraceptive or whatever it may be, to be put into the field to be tested. They don't test hunters to go in the field. They don't test culling to go in the field. They don't test some of those other things. So it was enlightening for him to bring that out. I also want to mention that Fire Island that Mr. Shirley brought up tonight, Mr. Chairman, is that first year, as big as they were and as many as they called, they only did 25. And because of the curve that you have to worry about, the window. And in Tega K, typical window for hunting when pressure's on is from that September to that November. And in our case here, we don't have hunting, so the pressure's not on them. That would be a more opportune time. I think the numbers would have been much higher. Come back to second year that they did Fire Island, and Fire Island was one of the test places for PCP back in 2009 for many years there, but they did 220 deer. So I think don't be disappointed on that. I think the hybrid will work. You guys get to make that decision. Thank you very much.
In light of that, Mr. Porter, would you like to speak? Okay. Okay. Now that will conclude our public comments. All right, brings us to our approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve our January 16th, 2024 and January 22nd, 2024 special meeting minutes?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to make a motion to approve the regular city council meeting January 16, 2024 minutes and the special city council meeting January 22nd, 2024 minutes.
I'll second that motion.
Do we have any discussion, subtractions, deletions, additions? All right. With that, I'll ask the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. That will bring us to our committee reports. Councilman Shirley, if you would, please, sir.
Sir, the Planning Commission met this month, and they discussed the red line changes to the Marina Overlay District. They also are challenged to take a look at that body as that entire body of work, which I think we've kind of made clear that we'd like them to take a look at that. So just for public knowledge, we've asked for a fresh look at that from Planning Commission to take a look at that Marina Overlay District as a whole and seek some recommendations from them on what that should look like going forward. That was, they also addressed the fencing issue and took public comments on that as well.
Thank you, Councilman Shirley.
Did I miss anything, Ryan? Thanks.
Okay. And with that, we will move to our Planning Commission recommendation on the amendment to the...
No EDC?
Nope, no EDC.
Okay.
You don't have any EDC?
Thank you.
Our Planning Commission recommendation on the amendment to the Marina Overlay District. Mr. Ross, if you would please take it away, sir.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, February 6th Planning Commission meeting, we had a quorum present and we unanimously approved the edits as shown with the first reading, with the understanding that council would return the Marina Overlay District back to planning for a full review afterwards.
Thank you, sir. With that, we will bring up our second reading of an amendment to the zoning code ordinance 77 as it relates to the Marina Overlay District. This is the second and final reading of an amendment to the zoning code ordinance 77 as it relates to the Marina Overlay District. Article 20, this amendment will remove a hotel as a conditional use, require a master plan and a traffic impact study be submitted before any rezoning is considered for a restaurant or yacht club within the Marina Overlay District. Also, any new restaurant or yacht club must have access to a major thoroughfare.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to make a motion to approve the second reading of an amendment to the zoning code ordinance 77 as it relates to the Marina overlay district.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have any further discussion?
I think we covered it in detail last month.
I thought we did as well. All right. In that, I would ask the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Next item of business is a second reading of an ordinance 591. This ordinance is to repeal ordinance 585 in its entirety, to include all exhibits and cancel the related agreement. This is the second and final reading of ordinance 591. The passage of this ordinance would repeal ordinance 585 in its entirety, to include its exhibits and cancel the contract for the exchange of property dated November 20th, 2023 with Tega Marina Limited.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to make a motion to approve the second reading of Ordinance 591 of ordinance repealing Ordinance 585, its exhibits, and authorize the city manager to cancel the contract for the exchange of property dated November 20th, 2023 between the city of Tega and Tega Marina Ltd.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Do we have any further discussion?
Yes, I have a couple comments, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
If that would please council. Just for the benefit of our residents, those watching, those that are here, those that will watch in the future, it's my opinion that we repealed this ordinance due to an effort to show good faith to our residents that research was done. Unfortunately, after the fact, some of us on council felt that this was a hasty decision that wasn't researched properly. A lot of our residents felt that way too. We've decided unanimously last month and hopefully this month to repeal this. I also want to say that I think there's a terrific opportunity for us as a community to ask planning to take a look at the overlay district at the Marina and see what opportunities we have for growth there, for development, for vitalization, for some very positive impact that we can have on the community, generating tax revenue, creating a wonderful space for our residents to enjoy there. I don't feel comfortable with the way this original ordinance 585 went, and for that reason, I'm going to be voting to repeal it tonight.
Is there any further discussion? Okay. With that, I would ask the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Let the record show one abstain. Okay. We'll cover the discussion to consideration of potential wildlife management solutions. City staff has been working with various experts in the field of wildlife management to develop a non-lethal deer management option for consideration. Deputy City Manager Joey Blethen and Dr. Tony DeNicola of White Buffalo will be presenting those options to council.
Those were the options that Dr. DeNicola walked through earlier in the special presentations. Yeah, not looking for council to make any kind of decision tonight. There was a lot of information that came your way.
Mm-hmm.
This is to give y'all an opportunity, if y'all want to continue to discuss deer this evening. We can obviously come back next month or the following month or never, depending on what council's temperature is, to discuss. But I think there definitely should be a discussion at some point as to what is the path forward. Yeah, to where we can work with you guys, members of the community, whomever their stakeholders may be, to develop a wildlife management program, or as I think Dr. DeNicola said, or just leave the deer alone. So this is a placeholder for you guys. If y'all want to have further discussion on that tonight, given the hour, if there's not an appetite for that, that's totally council's prerogative.
With that, I would entertain, would anyone like to further discuss at this point in time?
I have several points no, just kidding. I think,
I think we've covered a lot of deer this evening.
We sure have.
Hours of deer.
We
I don't
sure
think we
have.
should really go into that right now until we can actually digest the information that we were received and look at that again and just really look at it with a fresh set of eyes due to the hour.
I think you're right, Councilman Carter. There's a tremendous amount of information there that's been shared by multiple folks that are much better experts than me. And I think if we take some time, revisit that over the course of the next couple of months, put a good plan together or not, I think that's incumbent upon us.
One of the options that I think we've talked to you, Charlie, about was to possibly add an additional workshop opportunity for council to sit and have more of a roundtable discussion for things like this, where it's really difficult to do a conversation when it's just that 2x2 requirement to all of us, for all of us to communicate to a consensus. So I think that that would be a really great opportunity for us to add that second meeting as a workshop. And I believe those are public workshops as well, so that we can have these discussions and consider options in a roundtable discussion setting, rather than the 2x2 that doesn't become very effective.
We can take a look at the calendar and push some dates out to council to see what best fits with y'all's schedules, and get something calendared to where y'all can have that open dialogue. But yeah, as you stated, yes, anytime the five of y'all are together, unless it falls under the parameters of executive session, it is a public open meeting. Yes, ma'am.
Yep. I think that's a great suggestion, because we try to do 2x2s and try and figure this thing out over the course of the next several months. We're going to be back in the fall and no decision made, and I don't think we want to be there. Thank you, Carmen.
Charlie, maybe at this workshop on Saturday, we could discuss the future workshops.
Sure.
That's where I'm going to be there.
We absolutely can.
Yeah.
Anything further? With that, I would call on our MVP for the evening, Mr. Ryan Ross. If you would please, sir, give us the Planning Commission's recommendation on the public hearing item, sir.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Planning Commission met shortly following our public hearing and unanimously voted to pass the red lines to the Ordinance 77 as it relates to fencing requirements, Article 13. Any questions for me?
Do we have any idea how many of those properties would be impacted that back to a golf course?
City staff, are there any townhomes that bought back to a golf course? I am not aware of any.
Silver Gold
All of
Townhomes.
Silver Gold.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Does their HOA currently allow? Because that was one of the things that we talked about.
I'm not familiar with their HOA covenants and restrictions, but I don't believe they do.
They don't.
That was one of the items we talked about in the Planning Commission meeting is obviously there's what city allows, but then obviously what HOAs allow. So even if the city allows it, the HOA could decide for or against it within the HOA covenants themselves.
I think the HOA is silent because I'm pretty sure it's silent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. And with that, we will cover the consideration for the introduction of the first reading of an amendment to the zoning code, Ordinance 77, as it relates to fencing requirements. This is an introduction and a first reading of an amendment to the zoning code, Ordinance 77, as it relates to fencing requirements. This item is being considered as a result of public comments made at January 16th council meeting and is requested by Councilmember Tom Heislip. Specifically, Windhaven Townhome residents voiced concerns over privacy fences not being permitted. A public hearing was scheduled for this meeting, and council is considering amending this zoning code to allow for such fences. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to make a motion to approve the introduction and first reading of an amendment to the zoning code ordinance 77 as it relates to fencing requirements, Article 13.
Have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
We have some discussion.
Conversation.
Oh, yeah, we can discuss, sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I get
Sorry,
one a
I'm sorry,
meeting.
Mr. Mayor.
I get one.
So, Councilman Miller and I were just having some discussion about making sure that the HOAs have some flexibility to make the decisions that they need to make in addition to this, right? So should we include that in the motion to give the, is that required or is that necessary?
It's not necessary,
Okay.
because we don't control the covenants and restrictions. So their covenants and
We're giving
restrictions.
them autonomy, they can make their own decision, right?
They can, just so long as it does not violate the city zoning.
Got it.
Okay, so, which is what the issue was in Windhaven, so we've, for a good long while, we've always had the opacity rule. I don't know that privacy fences have ever been allowed in TKK, to be honest. The developer put together their covenants and restrictions, which are not required to be submitted to the city, and their covenants and restrictions in Windhaven allowed for it, which is what caused the issue, because now that put them in violation of city zoning.
Right.
If council moves forward with first read and subsequent second read, then they're good, right? They can't go beyond what our zoning. They can be more restrictive than the zoning, and that's a private contract between the HOA and the individual lot owners.
Does that satisfy our questions?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that the HOA could set different restrictions that would apply specifically to the residents that.
In that community, right?
Yeah, are in that community.
If I can approach. Yep. Thank you, Nick.
Go ahead.
Please, Nick.
There's actually
Keep us straight here.
letter E in our fence ordinance says some properties may have additional restrictions on fencing style, size, and/or material imposed by restrictive covenants bound to the property by Associated Homeowners Association, Architectural Review Committee, or similar applicable body. So it's actually already in the fencing code specifically. So, yeah.
Do we have any additional discussion, comments? Sure?
Sorry, sir.
Okay. Now can I do it? I would ask the question then. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Record show we're unanimous. Okay.
That means you can put up a fence. Correct. That's true. Thank you for that. Unless we change our mind.
Okay. Next item of business is consideration of the introduction and first reading of an ordinance to amend Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 2, Ordinance 565 of the city's code. Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 2 of the city's code deals with finance and more specifically purchasing. At Mayor Pro Tem Miller's request, if approved by council, this amendment would include a provision that if the city is going to enter into a revenue-generating contract of more than $10,000, the city will follow the same bid requirements as specified for services the city would pay for. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I motion to approve the introduction.
Put your mic on, dear.
I motion to approve the introduction of the first reading for an ordinance to amend Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 2, Ordinance 565 of the city's code.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I would like to bring for discussion, just to get some feedback. This also states that regarding contracts and the bid process, that there's a minimum of no less than 15 business days to get a bid process in place. Just want to get opinions of whether that in general, council
That's
feels
reasonable.
that's a reasonable number of days, because I know that there's been times that that we've had limited contractors bid on,
Because of time restrictions.
because of time restrictions. And then the other one was just this more for transparency and the ability to have clear understanding of what it is that the city is engaging in as far as contracts, that right now it states that the city manager or its designee reserves the right to further negotiate terms of the bid with the chosen bidder, even if such terms alter the terms, conditions, and/or specifications of the invitation for bid. I would like to have a consideration for that if a contract is going to change in terms, that council is aware of it, or that we have some say-so on what that change might be, so that it holds all of us accountable for those decisions when it comes to contracts.
Microphone.
Sorry. It's something that the community is looking at in regards to our bid process for all of the contracts that we're doing for purchasing or for for services. But this aligns with what we're looking for those contracts. But then to have a caveat in there to make sure that there's nothing like a curveball that's been sent to us makes sense in order for council to review that. So I agree.
So here's my suggestion to everybody. I would suggest that you remove your first and second motion and that we table this item until you can get all of the facts and information straightened out that you won't put in it.
I would prefer not to table the item so that we can come back to, this is the first reading. We can have an approval and then come back at the second reading with.
So if there are other changes that council wants made and they're not captured in the motion and approved tonight, you would have to go back to a new first read.
Okay. So I guess the question is, does anyone feel like we need additional time to consider those two things as what they might impact going forward? And then do we want to then come back as a first reading another time, or do we want to make those conversations now and consider it?
I'm in agreement with what you were talking about in regards to adjusting the time frame and being able to have a second set of eyes on the contract after the negotiation through the city manager. So if we can reverse.
Just for point of reference, I can't approve any contract, okay? Council has to vote, and council has voted on every contract.
And
I get
that's-
authorized to sign it, right, by council after their vote. I work to negotiate the deal to bring to council for approval. If that deal is going to change, i.e. change the contract, I'm required to bring that back to council. I do not, as the city manager, I do not have the authority to approve or amend any contract without council's approval. So-
Regardless amount, regardless of the amount of the contract?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
That is correct. Now, on the 15-day thing, I would say that, yes, there have been times where we have put things out for bid and we got very minimal respondents. A lot of that is market-driven. You know, there have been times where I'm sure y'all have seen it in the construction world, where everybody is busy and they just don't want to mess with it, you know, because it may be a smaller project or something like that, where they're doing massive projects. I'm not aware of any bid that we've put out where people didn't respond because it was 15 days. The majority of our bids, and the 15 days is a minimum, right? We did that when we put this together so that that council, this council, future councils, you're not handcuffed, right? If you need that quick turnaround, if the time is right, we got to strike now, that type of thing. Most of our contracts, I would say we're probably putting out those bids and RFPs for 30 days, sometimes even longer.
So the
I think to that
15
point, it depends on the project. You know, the larger the project, for example, a street patching project that we have going out right now, bids aren't due until March 1st, and we put that out in January. Just because of the large scale of that, we wanted to give more time to get as accurate bids as possible. So it just depends on the scale of the bid.
Charlie, one question.
Yes.
So you got the 15 days.
Mhm.
That's prior to the bid opening date, and then you got the time for the bid opening as well, where they can submit, right?
So the 15 days would start from the date that we advertise to the date that we open the bids.
And then you open the bid and they have, to whenever that closes.
No, when we open the bids are closed. We're not accepting any
Oh,
more
we
bids.
say when you open them, it's not when they submit them then.
But they can
That
set
is
the
correct.
the time
They
parameters to be
can,
longer.
most people, when we give a deadline on bids, that's the day that we get them.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, very, very seldom do we get one that's a week early, a few days early. I mean, when we say 2:00 on Friday, they're coming in at noon on Friday generally. Now, as Joey said, the larger the project, and the bigger the scale, we want to give as much time as we absolutely can, just so people can sharpen their pencils a little more, right? We did that with the Catawba Park bids, we did it with the police station bids, we did it with the fire station bids, and so on and so forth. Now, I work as it comes in, and we need you to sharpen that pencil a little more. We work with whoever that supposed low bidder is, right, to see where can we get a little bit better deal. We're working with the person that quote unquote won the bid, but technically they haven't won the bid until we bring it to council to actually do the bid award, all right? Then we work through contracts, all right? Some of it doesn't require a contract, right? They gave us the bid, go do the work, and they go do the work, but we still have to get the bid award from city council before we can issue the notice to proceed, all right? So you've already got some of these fail-safes, if you will, that perhaps you are talking about. But again, if council wants to dive into it deeper, if we can't accurately capture it tonight in the motion, then you're going to have to do you can either finish with this one and then pick it back up again, or we would have to go back to a new first read, depending on how y'all want to cover it. Yes, or you could table it and we can continue to work through it, and once it's a document that council's good with, we bring it in for a new first read, or for a first read if it's tabled, so.
I have two questions, if I may. So the language of this agenda item says that going into a revenue generating contract. Is that revenue for the city or revenue for the contractor?
It's for the city.
Okay. More than $10,000. What happens if it's less than $10,000?
Then that requirement wouldn't exist. So if somebody if we wanted somebody to provide some service to the, I don't know.
The landscaping contract for $5,000.
Right.
All right.
If we put out landscaping contract and it's $5,000, then these changes wouldn't apply.
It would be the same as a $5,000 contract for anything else that is it's a cost to the city.
If it's a cost to the city and it's budgeted for and it's less than $10,000, that is correct. Okay. If it's not budgeted for, regardless of cost, then we got to bring it back to the city.
Okay.
That's already in the code.
Because I'm looking at one of the changes under the scope. It just says that you're adding the revenue producing contract and agreements to the addition of the whole policy. So the whole policy applies to revenue producing contracts in the same way as procurement contracts would
Correct.
apply.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That's the intent of what you have before you tonight. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
How do you feel about it? You want to table it or do you want to move?
I want to move forward with it.
Okay.
Okay.
You have a motion and second. 15 days? Minimum? Yes.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. Do we have any more discussion?
Ready to roll?
I will call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. That will bring us to
Transparency, man. That's good. Good discussion. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Charlie.
consideration of an encroachment agreement for 2008 Marquesas Avenue. The owners of 2008 Marquesas Avenue are requesting to encroach upon the Lake Wiley Greenbelt area, which is owned by the city. The proposed area is between their lot and Lake Wiley. Their request is to enlarge their rear yard and make various improvements to include constructing a concrete path, retaining wall, and a paver patio. If approved, the owners would be permitted to encroach upon the area.
I don't know at what point do I recuse myself, if it's after the second or before.
You can do it now.
Okay. Out of abundance of caution, I would like to recuse myself from any discussion and vote regarding the encroachment agreement for 2008 Marquesas Avenue, as I have a professional interest with the adjoining property.
Duly noted. All right.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to make a motion to approve the encroachment agreement for 2008 Marquesas Avenue and authorize the city manager to execute said agreement.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do we have further discussion?
No, diagrams are pretty clear. Thank you.
Okay. In that, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Well,
With one recusal.
the four. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just briefly, just as a point of order and for clarification, if you wouldn't mind, Ms. Miller, if we could restate the motion from 7C just for the record. Casey's telling me that we don't have that right now. So Ms. Miller made the motion and Mr. Shirley made the second. But if we could restate that motion, please.
There was no amendment to it, right?
Mm-mm.
You made the motion?
Yes. So I would like to make a motion to approve the introduction of the first reading of an ordinance to amend Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 2, Ordinance 565 of the city's code.
Second.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And with that, we will move on to our city manager's report. So if you would, please, Mr. Funderburk, take it away.
Sorry about that. Hold on one second. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. On March 9th, Trees SC will be hosting a tree canopy session and tree giveaway from 10 to noon at the pavilion here at the TK Golf Club. Trees will be given away on a first-come, first-served basis, and the program will cover tree planting and tree care. This event is being sponsored by Duke Energy's Power Plant program. And I'm told that the trees are 10 to 12 feet tall, so don't come in your Honda Civic to get your free tree. It's not going to fit, but super excited to host this program. Tim Gillette has been on the board for Trees SC for a number of years, and glad to see them doing this program here. Spring sports are underway with practices. Once again, we had a tremendous turnout for our youth sports, bringing in 2,543 participants between soccer, flag football, baseball, and girls softball. And we are still doing registration for our 13, 14-year-old baseball program. And I believe that runs until March 1st. So if you've got a 13, 14-year-old kid that's looking to play some baseball, you've got till March 1st to get them signed up. Here's a little different one for you. We have been awarded the 2025 Quad Ball National Qualifier to be hosted at Catawba Park February 15th and 16th of 2025. If you're like I was, you're probably now wondering, what is quad ball? So our Harry Potter enthusiasts will recognize this game as Quidditch from the books and movies, only without the flying, but still with the broomsticks. So we're excited to partner with Visit York County, who's helping us bring that tournament in, and we'll have a lot more information as we get a little closer to time. But excited to see some of that notoriety in an event like that coming to Catawba Park. Great job to Dustin and his staff for working with Visit York County to bring something a little unique out to our facility. So, and with that, I think we've had enough for tonight. So I will end my manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Funderburk. And with that, we will cover council comments. And as always,
I will rock.
Councilman Carter, please, sir.
Here we go. Hey, you guys, thank you. It's a long evening, so thank you guys for hanging in there with us. Thank everyone else that was here as well and watching online. For those of you who made public comments, we do want you to know that your voices are heard. There's a prime example of that in regards to this evening with regards to the hotel, the Marina Overlay District, the fencing were prime examples for that. So your guys' voices are heard, so thank you so much for coming. We implemented the first phase of our wildlife management plan since our last meeting, and it was extremely successful. Chief Crosby talked about this a while ago. Just because the safety of it was absolutely great. I want to thank Chief Crosby and all of Tega Police Department, York County Sheriff, everybody that was involved, the USDA for keeping this program, the operational excellence for that program, and keeping the residents and everyone involved safe. So thank you so much. Deputy City Manager Joey Blethen, man, you have spent so many hours in regards to this, and thank you so much for everything that you've done in regards to this report and everything that you continue to do. It's not an easy task, so thank you so much. Let's see. So since we've had the first phase of the wildlife management program, I want to recognize our city staff. Our city staff, especially the ones that work at City Hall, have taken the brunt of phone calls, voicemails, emails, and everything like that. And they weren't the ones that voted to move forward with our plan. They are the ones that are taking a whole bunch of it. We've taken it too, but they've taken the whole a bunch of it. So I want to say thank you to them. Their professionalism and grace throughout this whole process has been amazing for the residents of our community. So I really want to make sure I recognize them and say thank you. I have a whole bunch more, but I'm going to keep it nice and short. So normally I want to go off and recognize somebody who has done something important in the community, but I can't recognize just one person. I want to recognize an organization, and I want to recognize the Tega Police Department, and I want to recognize the community. The Tega Police Department sponsored the Polar Plunge for the South Carolina Special Olympics, and the community donated, participated, supported everything, jumped in that cold water. It was awesome. But they did this, and they raised over $69,000 for the South Carolina Special Olympics. That was an amazing thing for the Tega Police Department and our community. So that's what I want to recognize on my final comment. And I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Heisler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Reiterate what Brian said. Kick off here to Police Department, Chief Joey, your department. I mean, above and beyond. I know they were taxed after those 2 weeks for sure. But them with the help of the Sheriff's Department couldn't have done it and had such a safe operation. So thank you for all your work, Joey. Great job. I know you worked tirelessly on this, for Dr. DeNicola, specifically call you out, man. That says something there. So great job. Gretchen, I appreciate everything you did with the communications. I know there was some mixed guidance from us in the beginning, which I think caused some confusion, and no fault of your own. So thank you. Let's see. The deer, I'm not going to bring up the deer. I'm going to say one thing. It wasn't quite as successful as we had hoped. But hey, you live and learn. You don't know. As Dr. DeNicola said, we ain't experts. we're trying, man. And we hear you. And we'll keep trying. But Dr. DeNicola, I believe he's gone. But man, if he's watching at home, thank you. What a presentation. What a wealth of information. And we'll take all that back and get together and keep rolling with this wildlife management program. Two other things real quick, and I'm done. The entire staff, as Brian said, they took the brunt of it, and some of it was disappointing. I'll use that word. That members of the community would call City Hall and really, some of the stuff they said to the employees who, as Brian mentioned, didn't make this decision. Listen, I voted for it. You got a problem, yell at me. Don't yell at the staff. They're just doing their job. So keep that in mind when you, I know it's an emotional charged topic, but, these city staff don't deserve that. So please come yell at me. Don't yell at them. Heather Jones, I know you asked a couple questions, and I had the same question. The public art jury. I don't know if it's too late to add that to the board. What's the board called? What do you apply?
To match board.
Match board. I think it'd be a good idea to take applications so we have it. If we can't do it now, maybe we can do it in the next month or two. Great point. I know we talked about it, and I forgot to mention it to you, so my bad.
If that's something council wants, I mean, we can get it rolling. It doesn't have to have a end date of end of February like the rest of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we got a resolution saying we're supposed to have one, we should probably staff it. I mean, any objection to that? Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
We can get working on that and just put a later sunset on the application deadline.
Okay, great.
And then just bring it to council.
And then as far as Parks and Rec update, I know the last I saw, the members were going through and looking at the pocket parks and making reports, and not asking for anything tonight, but maybe next month we could see where that's at, because it has been a couple years. All right, that's all. Thanks. And everybody at home, everybody here, thank you so much for coming out. It's a long night.
And with that, we will swing it around to the other side to Councilman Shirley. Take it away, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you for everyone that has attended tonight and that's listened online, will listen in the future. Gosh, this is a record for me for length of a council meeting, so I'm going to try not make it any longer. But Heather, thank you for your comments on the art committee, and maybe make it part of Parks and Rec's ad hoc. Great suggestion. In 2020, this city council felt it was best to put that in place, and I think we should see that through. I think there's a place for that. So thank you for keeping us focused on that. Hey, Brian Howell, thanks for your comment on Charlotte Independence. I hear you loud and clear, man. I spoke with Charlie and also with Dustin tonight about that. You're not the only guy that told me about that, but from what I understand, you have daughters, right? Three boys. Okay. Sorry about that. Yep. So it sounds like all but maybe two of those teams have coaches for them. You had mentioned something to me about somebody close to you that might be interested in coaching. I did a little research on that and found out that that person would be very welcome to coach. So no fear there. Really appreciate you making that suggestion for us. My kids went through the rec program here and then played club ball, and it was so valuable for them and for us as a family. There's so much we benefited from that, and many people in here, folks sitting up here, have all benefited from it too. Councilman Heislip's got a champion soccer player in his family that's killing it out there. So, that's meaningful for our families and for our children, and we want to see your kids have a great experience with that. So, step into that program or encourage others to do the same and get into that coaching program. I hope that goes well for you and your family. Is Laurel Bougie still here? You got the coolest last name. Yeah, I can't help but notice that every time you come up here. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chief Crosby, Joey, Charlie, staff, everybody that put their heart and soul into what happened with this first phase of the deer culling process. Man, it's not popular. It's not fun. It's not sexy. It's uncomfortable for a lot of us. We believe in the process, and we believe that change needs to happen, and sometimes change is not comfortable. But I want you to know that the 5 people that sit up here are ridiculously committed to get it right and to do it right. I promise you that. I talk to these people every day, and I know where their heart is for this city, and I know what they want to do, and they want to do it right. So please have confidence in that and reach out to us and communicate it with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Shirley. Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
I'll say the same thing as far as the staff that worked through this. You didn't just have to learn all things deer related and do all the research and then try to put a plan in place and try to execute a plan. You also had to deal with 5 additional talking heads that were constantly asking questions. So thank you for doing that. Chief Crosby, your passion for what you do and and how you feel about the city and protecting its citizens was very heartfelt, and it was very much noted. Joey, you have taken the head role in this, and it is not a head role. You've really truly stood up and done what you needed to do as far as learning all the things that we ask about, and again, having 5 people constantly in your ear telling you thoughts and ideas and questions is difficult, but we appreciate it because it helps us understand it better, and it helps us validate our thought process and decision making. And Gretchen, what you do is constantly being on a treadmill trying to catch up with what questions you might be getting next and what programs you need, the way that you need to lay out the program. So I know that this is something that is going to be ongoing for all of you guys in here, and I just wanted to say that the care and passion that you have for it definitely has shown up. It was a great polar plunge. I'm completely switching around gears here. Thank you guys for jumping in, and we raised $2,300. Literally jumped in together, except for Mr. Hyslip over there, and we are going to be scheduling his solo jump. Absolutely going to happen. Heather, you mentioned reminding people about the positions in the different committees and commissions that we have. And so if you are watching and you've made it this late, then you really need to be in one of these committees, because if you are that dedicated, your input is absolutely needed. And then chat with council. We have our second one coming up on Thursday, 9:30 at the Beach Club. I hope that we get some of you to come in and ask us questions, because we really don't want to just talk to each other. So please come join us 9:30 on Thursday at the Beach Club. That's it. AM, not PM. Yeah, Thursday morning. I'm done.
Good. Okay. Well, that comes to me. So to answer Bert's question about PZP, simply PZP is not a viable option for Tega. It's been in the field for 30 years and nobody uses it, so there goes that. Kathy, the push apps for the city council meetings, great suggestion. Thanks for that. We'll look into getting that together for you. That way, once we get it out, we can push it out and you guys have got it. That way we can communicate better. And we're always looking for means and ways that we can communicate better with our citizens. So, that is one thing that another Crosby thing that came up, so we appreciate everything that he does, because he does it all, it's 100% great. And which brings me to the polar plunge. Thank you, Chief, for putting that on for us. Maggie did an excellent job on that. She is excellent when it comes to that. It was cold, but we were freezing for a reason, and raised was it about $72,000? About $72,000 for Special Olympics. So, maybe next year we can set the goal for 100K. So that'd be great. If we could do that, that would be awesome. Another thing that not a whole lot of people knew about, we had a 5K run this weekend that our police were once again involved in. Folks, you want to talk about a police department that's involved in its city and with its citizens. And it was really cool. We had CMPD helicopter flying over, had our local sheriff's office, Fort Mill, Tega, collaborative effort from all the police. I'm sure if you came down the road and you saw all the police present, everybody had to wonder what was going on, and got choppers in the air and everything. So it was awesome. And I'll just encourage, if you ever see me running, get in front of me. But no, I really appreciate all the effort that was gone into that, and kudos to Ron Kirby for putting that together for us. It was excellent. White Buffalo, want to thank Dr. DeNicola for coming out and giving us a lot of his time tonight, folks. He did that for free. So, just a great guy. Appreciate you coming out. PD and staff on the deer coverage. Want once again, hats off to you. You guys did a great job. I know what it's like to burn both ends of the candle, and it does not work well. So we're going to explore some options to help staff out with that, to where we're not as taxing, as burdening as we need to be. Also, Joey, hats off to you for the job you did. USDA, Sheriff's Office, Kevin Tolson, thank you very much. Highway Patrol did a great job as well. Park and Rec, signups are going great. Dustin, your team is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for all you do for the kids. That is a program near and dear to my heart. It is what I think TEK is all about. Folks, if you get a chance to coach a team for the kids, do it. It will bless your heart, and you will build friends for life. So please, if we need some coaches, don't we, Dustin? We need coaches? Okay. So we need some coaches. Folks, just step up, volunteer your time. I guarantee you a blessing. Our Park and Rec staff, getting the fields ready, doing everything that they've got. We loaded like 7 tons of dirt at Turner Field. It was huge. Our guys take it in stride every day and do a great job. So hats off to all of our guys for getting everything ready. And then our maintenance guys, after storm cleanup, that they did a fantastic job day in, day out. They're on the weekend hauling deer out of this place, and they're on call 24/7, 7 days a week. Just do a great job. Kudos to the guys that were getting the Christmas lights down in the median this week. They did an awesome job at that too, folks. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to get those Christmas lights up and down. So thanks to those guys as well. I will say this, folks. There are issues that sometimes we all don't agree on. There are issues that require a little bit more thought, a little more effort in what we do. We try to get this right all the time. Sometimes we don't get it completely right. So I would ask for a little bit of grace on that because we're not perfect. We all err. We all are human. We try to get it right. So with that, we have to work things out together. If you want to be a part of the solution and a part of the efforts into working things out together, I think we've seen with the Marina District, we've seen with the deer, that council is willing to work with everyone. So give us a call. Let's sit down and talk about it instead of yelling at each other and doing it the way everybody else does it. Let's do it TEK way, and let's do it civilly. Don't need people stopping by putting rat poison out in people's houses and just not being good neighbors. Let's don't do that. Number one, it puts children in danger. It puts pets in danger. It puts other people in danger, and I really don't appreciate having a shop back it off my lawn. So please don't do that again, because you will be on candid camera. But as for that, folks, let's be good to each other. Let's do what the good book tells us to do, and love your neighbor as yourself, and do everything we can to help each other. So with that, we got one more item of business we need to take care of. We need to vote to amend the agenda for this evening to table executive session.
Motion to table the executive session.
I have a motion to table the executive session by Mr. Shirley. Do I have a second?
I would like to second that motion, please.
I have a second.
Aye.
All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And now I call a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'll make a motion to
Second.
adjourn.
Second.
Have a motion and a second.
Aye.
All in favor say aye.
Love you, mean it.
Let the motion reflect Mr. Carter on the adjournment, and on the second, and on the first, Mr. Heislip.